you have to triage all this stuff coming into everything that you read on Twitter, every podcast you listen to, every book you read is written by a person. And to your point, some people are great and some people aren't great. And you just have to like read through the middle. And to David, you say mute the world and build your own world. And it's like part of building your own world. You don't want to start from zero, like a feral child in the middle of the woods. Like you have all these building blocks that you get to build your world out of, but you have to be so selective today about what you take in and what you just like tune out and who you bring in and who you cut out.
When's the last time, should we look this up? Like, when's the last time we did this?
We recorded in January, was the last, or maybe it was late December was the last time it came out. But it was before you had announced Founders Only, but we hadn't had the event yet. So I want to recap Founders Only.
That feels like a lifetime ago. I thought we recorded like 6 months ago, not 4. All right, I'll see you guys in a couple months.
I think that was the last time I saw you guys in 3D. Founders, what's your recap of Founders Only, David? How was it from your perspective? This was like a private, invite only, 150 person event that David put on in Austin, Texas. His first like in person multi-day event.
I guess the way the idea came up, people might find interesting. I went to this place. It's called the campus of Lake Austin. It's where we held the event, and there was an asset management firm that asked me to come speak to their, like, they had a private event, like 150 people. And so that was like, I think last May or something like that. And so I wound up hanging out at this location for like 2 days. I'm like, this is really cool. Like once you get past the guard gate, like everything is self-contained, like where people stay, all the meeting rooms. And then if you had like little breakout sessions, which we didn't even do at Founders Only, which we're going to change on the next one, is there's like a ton of like private meeting space. It's just like a really beautiful location. I was like, man, if I ever do an event, I would do it. I think I would do it here. And then I just had that in the back of my mind, just went about like making the podcast or whatever. And then we went to, was it Main Street? Mitchell was with me because we went to a meeting with Clayton from Capital Camp and Brent from Capital Camp. And obviously, like, I'm good friends with Patrick, who's partners with Brent on Capital Camp. That was Main Street Summit when we had that meeting. Okay, so me and Mitchell stayed around an extra day after everybody left, and they had this idea. And I think Patrick was the first one to mention this to me, where it's like, well, you know, anybody who's been to Capital Camp knows it's like, you know, they do a fantastic job. They're full-time employees for the entire year. They have an entire like headquarters where me and Mitchell went. And Patrick's point was just like, well, like we're thinking about doing kind of like an AWS for events for like podcasters, like people like you. Would you be our first customer? And so I was like, oh, that's an interesting idea, because like the worst thing I could possibly do right now is the opportunity cost is too high for me to do literally anything but read books and make podcasts, right? So make the podcast, grow the podcast. That's all I have to do. And by them handling, like having a world-class events team that's done this multiple times, handling all the logistics, and essentially their pitch is like, hey, you own it, you name it, you know, you pick what the topics are, who goes, the pricing, everything. And then we just make sure it goes off like flawlessly. And we didn't have one complaint, like anything about logistics or any kind of issues at all. And so me and Mitchell went and talked to him, and I was like, okay, well, what's the fastest we could do this? And I think it was like, what the turnaround was pretty fast. It was like 4 months or something. And so the idea was, one, I wanted to experiment with, really, there's a big idea behind this, and it's something that is obvious in the books. We were just talking about this before we started recording. It's that relationships run the world. And our friend Chris Powers introduced me to this guy at his private event, because there's all these private events people don't know about, right? And in many cases, they're invite only. Like Chris Powers has an invite only 50-person event in Texas. And one of the guys there was, most of the people in the Texas event were like it was crazy the people you had there. It's like probably 80-90% of them were from Texas. So you had like a bunch of oil and gas people. You had people who had a real estate company, had like $500 million a year in revenue. You had all these family offices. And one of the guys Chris introduced me to was he was hired by a bunch of wealthy oil and gas Texas family offices to host private events for other family offices. And he said this line that fucking blew, like, was perfect, exactly what I had in mind. And I've realized this in the relationships that I've built. He's like, the relationships between the right people produce a nonlinear return. And if you look at all the people that have had like huge impacts in your life, you know, it's only a handful. Like my relationship with Patrick, that's a nonlinear return. He literally plucked me from obscurity and said, hey guys, I think this is good. This guy's more obsessed with podcasts than anybody else I've met. You should pay attention to this. And at Founders Only, I invited like all the speakers that came were like legit friends of mine, people I've spent a ton of time with, and they were all like A players is not even the word. And the perfect example of this is my friend Rick Gerson, who gave, I think, the first talk about relationships around the world. And he told, and let me back up. Every event I do will not be like, there's no recording. It's like, you have to be there. Right. And so it's like, hey guys, everybody be cool. Like, don't record, you know, you could say you're here or whatever, but you know, people talk way more open and freely when not being recorded. And Rick told this fantastic story of how meeting Sam Zell, because Sam was one of his best friends and his mentor for 25 years, literally changed his career. The relationship between Rick and Sam Zell produced a nonlinear return. And so my idea was like, okay, well, there's this idea that keeps happening where like my audience will pull products out of me. And so for years, they kept saying, can you introduce me to other founders that listen to Founders? And I was like, well, I don't have no mechanism to do this. And then Patrick and Brent gave me the mechanism to do that. And then what I did is like, for the first event, and I won't do this in the future, I read over every single application. Because I didn't know, I was a little nervous. I didn't know if I could do this. But what was remarkable to me is like I knew I had like obviously a, you know, just high value audience that listen to Founders. I think it's obvious. But there's so many people that were remarkable people that I didn't know were listening that applied to go to the event. And then I realized, oh, this is a mechanism for founders to build relationships with other founders, investors to build relationships with other founders and each other, but also a mechanism for these people to reveal themselves to me. And as a result, because of that event, you know, I went through, I don't know, 500, 600 applications, whatever the number is, you know, picked 150. You know, now I'm aware of, you know, these really interesting people that I'm interested in building deeper relationships with. And so like, I think that was like the biggest, like unlock where I'm like, oh, like, and then I did it and I was super nervous going up to this. This is like, I've just been doing these crazy episodes on Walt Disney. And it's the same way Walt Disney felt before the opening of Disneyland. You know, he had way more pressure than I did, but I was just like, oh, this sucks. I couldn't sleep. I was like, this is going to be terrible. I just assumed that like, I don't know what I'm doing. And I don't want, you know, people traveled all over the world. They went from Nairobi to Australia, New Zealand, Switzerland, Ireland, all over the country, Canada, Europe, Asia. And I'm like, these people are flying all over the fucking world. And like, I'm going to disappoint them. This is terrible. And then the day of the event, I flew over with some friends and I got advice like, you need to, why don't you, instead of saying I'm anxious about the event, say I'm excited. Like just literally reframe it. Just tell yourself, it's like, I'm not anxious. I'm excited. And so we're flying over. It's like, no, we had an incredible there was a bunch of like 4 incredible founders on the plane. The ride over was incredible. And then I was like, man, we're going to have fucking fun. And I invited like, in addition to maybe 130 people I didn't know, I invited like 20 good founder friends. And I was like, worst case, these other 130 people may like be, you know, jerks or something, but I have 20 founder friends that I know and love. And we're just going to have a good time. It's like sleepaway camp for business nerds. And it was remarkable. And I knew from the very first day, I was telling this guy, I was like, hey, like I was nervous. I feel good today, but I don't know if I'm going to do this again. And he's like, you have to. I was like, why? He goes, because he was saying, he's like, in your position, you get to meet all these people because they come to your, like this giant beacon that you put out into the world. And he's like, but that's not normal for people just building businesses in private. And he's like, I met 40 world-class entrepreneurs today. He's like, you have to do this. And by the time I got to the second or third day, I was like, oh, this is just going to be an ongoing thing. And so we're already planning 2 more. The next one will be in outside of San Francisco in this beautiful like in the Redwoods, like this, again, everything's going to be private. I think that's in the end of July, and then another one in Austin in the end of September.
Nice. It was an incredible event. And like, it's so funny to think that you were nervous beforehand, because it's so obvious that all you have to do is just like name a time and a place, and all the people who are fans of Founders and dedicated enough listeners are going to be similar enough and excited to meet each other that you don't even have to do anything. Like, that's the way it is at Capital Camp too, right? Like, anytime there's like a band playing, everyone's just like, can you play quieter? Like, I just want to talk to this person in front of me. Everyone's just so excited to meet each other that there's like very little pressure, actually, from our perspective, on like the agenda or the planning or the logistics or whatever. Like, you could put all those people in a warehouse and they'd have a great time.
Well, we saw this though, because remember the end of Main Street when we did what does Brent call it? Bang Bang? When we had two dinners in one night. And so we spent, the crazy part is Main Street was really fun. And I'm going back again this year, and I'm going to do a Founders meetup there. But it was like 6 or 7 of us. I can't remember the exact number. But like, we just went, and they're all like crazy characters, really fascinating people. And so we went to like one dinner and then the next, and Brent got to hang out with us the whole time. And you just saw, once he knew the event was done, his first Main Street Summit was done, now everybody that's left, like, 80% of the people are gone already. We're just all hanging out still. And he just was so happy and relieved. And that's exactly how I felt. And I felt it like the day I came back, but I also felt it like going into the second day. I was like, oh, everybody I met is cool. Like, that we're interested in the same stuff. Like, I could sit out there. What I was worried about, so I was, our friend Sam Hinkey, he was the one, like, I always call him for advice, even though he gives a speech at Founders Only saying that David doesn't listen to me. But so we were talking about this. He's like, what you have to worry about is, what you don't want is like a line of 150 people waiting to meet you. I was like, I want you to interact with each other. I'm like, and that wasn't like that at all. So I would be able to go to like where everybody was eating, and I talked to like 7 or 10 people, and everybody was cool. There was no like, there wasn't any kind of, nobody was like trying to grab at me or anything like that. They were just like, hey, like, we have the same thing. Like, what do you think about this book you read, or this episode, or what do you think about this? And everywhere I went, I just got into these very fascinating conversations. So it's like, oh, like, I'm very proud of this audience. Like, I'm very proud that this happened.
Yeah, but you got to put an event together where everyone, the brain power, people, I don't know if I was talking to Eric or Melanie or somebody, and they were like, well, what's different between this and Capital Camp?
You can't distinguish between conversations between me and your wife. That's fantastic.
It's about the same. Yeah. Same energy. We were just kind of dissecting how these events kind of like stratify or what are the different populations of all these events. And I noticed the Founders Only had particularly like high brain power. These people who had come in were, everyone's a reader. Capital Camp obviously has wildly impressive people too, but just everybody. I talked to more like technical engineers who were all cool and smart, but when you go to your own event, it's impressive that, you're not you don't have to be the star, because like everyone there was wildly impressive and interesting. And
they were also enormous.
A lot of big people. Eric was feeling bad because he didn't feel like he was in the top.
I would like text people through the app ahead of time, which is brilliant, by the way, to like let people connect and find each other and stuff. I was like, I'll be the tall guy in the black shirt. And I was like, there are like, it's a 150 person event. There's like 20 people here over 6'6". This is
everyone's
insane.
wearing a black shirt.
One of the things I was most proud about, because like, I'm really trying to push myself right now. Like, we kept pushing back this recording, and it's not like, I love you both. You're both good friends of mine. It's not that. It's just like, I wake up every day more obsessed, to the point where like, if this continues, we're going to have to be concerned about me. And what I love is like, I'm really trying to go after it. Like, I literally just have family and work, right? And, founder friends. That's really everything I'm doing. And what I love is that they're all excessively dedicated to self-improvement. Not only like they're building incredible businesses, they're reading all the time, but the gym was at like 5:30 in the morning, the second day. Was like, you could not move in there. And I'm like, oh, these are like, I love you people.
Yeah, it was a really cool vibes. I'm glad you're going to do more of those. This seems like an absolute no brainer.
Just like
for the building the brand and strengthening, like letting those fans connect to each other and build relationships strengthens it may not be obvious, but it strengthens the
I'm telling you right now,
value of the whole founders ecosystem so much.
If you listen to founders and you're like legit fan and you like it, and you find somebody else that's like that. So like, let me give you two examples. Like, one of the most impressive founders that I've ever met, and he's like super secretive, and he doesn't like, he's like, do you want me to introduce you to anybody? He's like, no, I'm fine. He's just like, he's a killer. And his name's Eric. And I was like, dude, I'd love if you come to this event. And he's like, oh no, I can't. And then he texts me back like an hour later. He's like, what am I talking about? He's like, I have to go. And so he wound up going. And then my friend Sam Poirier, who's the founder of Mercantile, went, right? They're both, I spent a ton of time talking to Eric. I spent a ton of time talking to Sam, right? And then I did not even think to introduce them. They somehow stumbled upon each other, right? And they immediately hit it off. The end of the night, I get a text from Sam. He goes, hey, that Eric guy. He's like, I think we're going to be friends for life. They had already, before the end of the day, because they're both like outdoorsmen too. They love to fish and hunt and kayak and all this other stuff. And so they're like, they already scheduled like a camping and hunting and fishing trip. First day.
Dude, that Eric, he's a fascinating cat. I got to hang out with him.
Yes.
Toward the end.
He's a
really
killer.
Interesting story.
He's such a quiet killer. And he's been like that dude's an OG founders listener back from when it was a private podcast. He would like how generous he's been with his information, because he's built this giant business. He's got a physical product component, but also a subscription product component. And like back when it was a subscription podcast, like he built tools to like his own proprietary tool, because he started out before he's an entrepreneur. He's a programmer and engineer. He's a reluctant entrepreneur. He's like, I don't trust these business guys. I have to learn how to do it myself. And he fucking smashed it. But like, he's like, yeah, you can have access to this tool for free. I gave him all my data. He's like, oh, and like, he just unbelievable the amount of time he delved into what I was doing and was just super helpful. He's just a remarkable person. And I was like, oh, that's it right there. Two people that I love didn't know that I loved them. And now they love each other. Like, and they're legit friends and they're talking all the time.
It'll be really interesting as you do more of these that move around. If you get like who are the ones who go to every single one, who are like the diehards, and how much is different geographically or seasonally based on like who can get to what. But I think like that's where things get really sticky for like the business part of the event side of things, is where like you become the platform for a bunch of people who are lifelong friends. That is just like, that's the context for them to get together. And like,
so I'm going to tell you a story too about like, this is why I think like the right relationships around the world, connecting two people, the right people together, does produce this nonlinear return. And there's a guy, and I can't name. He was at the event. I'm not gonna say who he is because he's super private. But me and Patrick were hanging out with him in Patrick's office in Greenwich a couple months ago, and actually I'm seeing him tonight for dinner. He's in Miami right now. And Patrick's like, the guy leaves. He goes, out of everybody I know, that guy's probably going to make the most money. He just thinks his business is incredible. He thinks the guy's an incredible person. And so that guy comes to the event, and I introduce him to another good friend of mine. Right. And I was like, dude, I don't know why. I just think you two should talk. They go down by the river. They have this conversation. I see the guy that Patrick said he's going to make more money than anybody else. He goes, I'm going for 10 billion. Like, essentially what his whole point was just like, he was obviously already like way past the need to work ever again. And he's like, the energy I got and the ideas I got from this other guy who was unbelievably impressive too. It reminded me of this thing where it was in one of Warren Buffett's biographies, where Warren Buffett would have these like private meetups. Like they were young. Warren's probably in his 30s or 40s, maybe 50s, probably not even 50s. So probably 30 and 40s. And people would drive all over the Midwest to Omaha. And this one guy's wife is like bitching and complaining. She's like, why are you spending $1,500 to go hang out with this guy? And his response was great. He goes, because he gives me energy. And like people discount that. Like that one conversation, you know, the guy traveled from the Northeast to come to Austin. Then he has this conversation. They go like, he's spending a lot of time and money, you know, several days of his time. Energy's your currency. Yeah. But like that energy makes a freaking difference. Like
anytime you can invest in energy, invest in energy.
The crazy thing about Walt Disney too, it's like, you know, when he's building Disneyland, he's 53 years old. You know, he's been chain smoking since he's like 17. He's kind of fat. They say he's slightly overweight. That's a nice way of saying he's chubby. but they talked about his energy levels that he had. He would move. I talked about this in the episode I just released. I just did a 2-part episode on Disney that I'm really proud of. But it talked about like this reoccurring theme in the history of entrepreneurship is like not only the high energy levels, but the high energy levels translated to speed, and that's speed inside your company, but also literally physical speed. There's so many of these books where like these guys walk fast. I'm like, what's going on here? It's like they have so much energy in there. There's like this manifesting. It has to come out. But yeah, I think energy is, it's one of the most important things, energy and focus.
I think about all that all the time on road trips, like road trip as metaphor for life, where like if you're like a one under the speed limit person, you're probably like not an entrepreneur. But if you're like 25 over, you're living like too dangerously and you're going to either like crash and die or have too many tickets or get your license taken. There's like a sweet spot of like 10 to 15 over that's like just pushing it enough that you like really value your time.
You might be onto something. So Steve Jobs famously did not want to have a license plate on his car, so he'd get pulled over all the time.
Yeah.
There was like this loophole in California that you had like 6 months. By the time you get the car, you have like a 6 months window to get a license plate. And so got pulled over for speeding. And so he'd lease a new Mercedes every 6 months. So he never had to have a license plate. But there's this one story in one of the books I read about him where he gets pulled over. He's doing like 120 or something, or whatever the number is. It's like way over. He's like kind of pissed off that the guy's pulling him over. And then he immediately just goes right back to 120. Like,
there was
like, that ticket had no influence on his behavior. He didn't get caught the second time. Whoever's in the car, I think the author's in the car with him. He's like, this guy's
in the Microsoft acquired, they talk about Bill Gates. He's a hot shot. Windows is starting up. He's making some money. He goes and gets a 911. He's in Seattle. Like no one in Seattle has a 911, much less this like 20-year-old kid. And he gets 2 tickets from the same cop in one day. That's where his mugshot comes from. They took him to jail. Yeah.
Did you read Hard Drive, Mitchell?
Yeah.
Okay, so then you'll remember this story. That's one of my favorite. That's easily a top 10 all-time biography of an entrepreneur for me. It's Hard Drive. It's hard to find, but it's a biography of the first 35 years.
Episode of it.
Multiple. I've done 2. I'll probably, I'll read that book, reread that book, every few years. But he had this thing where like when they were moving Microsoft from Albuquerque, New Mexico, if I remember correctly.
Oh, he was in Albuquerque.
Yeah, right. He was Albuquerque. No, but he does the drive. So they're like, we're going to race from New Mexico to Washington. And he had an affinity for Porsches. And I think he gets pulled over one time and the cop asks him I think this is in the book, or maybe it might have been in Paul Allen's autobiography, his co-founder, which I also read. And the cop asked him, he's like, how fast? They pulled him over. He's like speeding. He was like, how fast does this car go? And Bill Gates goes, I was about to find out.
I feel like all the goats have a car story. There's the one about Elon, like as soon as he sold his first company, goes out and buys a McLaren and then crashes it in like his first week and then starts laughing hilariously on Sand Hill Road.
Yes.
On Sand Hill Road
money,
and starts laughing. And he's like, why are you laughing? And he's like, oh, the funny part is it's not even insured yet.
Yeah, I love that. So I guess they're like there's clearly a massive demand for founders and investors to meet other founders and investors. What I'm going to do is like, there's no reason for me to ever go above 150 because like Capital can't exist. Main Street Summit exists. So if I'm going to do that, I'd rather just help them sell tickets. Not that they don't need my help to do that anyways, but like, I'd rather just refer people to this already existing thing. I don't want to build products that just other people do as well. But I am going to experiment with there's a couple, one more like 100 to 150 people events. And then I'm going to be doing like some 20 person, events at like excessively high end places. And that'll be like no programming at all. It's literally just like highly vetted, 20, successful investors and entrepreneurs hanging out together, just doing activities and really talking. And the next 2 events I'm going to do is for founders only. I was on the fucking stage like the whole day. I'm not doing like, and more of that is like, I want to also talk to people. So we're going to do much more like small group sessions and way less. Like you hear me, there's 400 hours of me. If you really want to hear me talk, like you can listen to on demand, even though I do think the presentations were like Sam Hinkie's. It kills me that guy will not let me record him because I thought his presentation was like almost 2 hours long. It was Go ahead.
I thought the intro was fantastic.
Yeah, the intro was my favorite part too. That was the funniest shit I've ever seen in my whole life. I know we're not supposed to like fully recap it, David, because it was like whatever. There's a no recording rule.
You can tell about the intro.
David gets Sam Hinkie is a great white buffalo of a speaker. He doesn't write anything. He won't record anything, but he's brilliant. And the things that come out of his mouth are like per word wisdom is incredible.
Yeah, he's wise. He's a very wise person.
He's very wise, but he stays low key. And so every chance that people get to kind of listen, they appreciate. And so I was looking forward to hearing Sam Hinkie. Everybody's looking forward to hearing Sam Hinkie. David gets Sam Hinkie to the conference and then up on the stage and spends probably 10 of the 40 minutes that you have introducing him. And then I started laughing.
Half hour.
I started laughing at 10 minutes. I could not stop laughing at 15 minutes. I started texting my wife at 20 minutes being like, this is the funniest shit I've ever seen. And then I think, it was between 25 and 30 minutes that like your intro stopped and Sam said the first words. It was a beautiful, very kind, moving intro. But I could not stop. My whole fist was in my mouth. I was laughing so hard.
I got to immediately walk up to Sam and go, my favorite part of the speech, the intro. It was next level.
The most David thing I've ever seen.
Every single person there was like, the reason I did that is because I wanted to explain like relationships rule the world, right? Relationships run the world. These people, every single person here has been like life-changing for me. Because, and I built relationships in large part because they first were listeners to the podcast. And so like, I'm a legit good friend with Sam. Like our wives know each other. Like we go out to dinner with our wives. I know his kids. He's met my kids. I don't introduce my kids to anybody. I stay at his house. Like, and he's just been super helpful for no other reason than he really believes in what I'm doing. And, so I wanted people to understand. It's like, listen, I can just come up and you have all these smart, successful people talk to you, but like understand why we're here. It's like, you're here for 2 days. Take advantage of the opportunity. Every single fucking person sitting next to you is doing something interesting. They've been vetted. Like, talk to them. And, I'm an introvert. I was explaining that. I was just like, listen, my instinct would be to go hide in the fucking corner. But if I was here, if I was on your seat, I'd be like, I'm going to be uncomfortable for 2 days, but I'm going to try to literally like get to know these people.
And everybody was great. It was cool of you to give away some tickets to some like young kids too. So there was like some really smart, like 20-year-olds and stuff that were there.
They hustled them out of me. I was not. This is a business, first of all. Let's be clear.
Even better.
So
even better.
My friend Rick, who was there, like I love the fact what he said. Because Rick, all day long people want something from Rick. He's got $20 billion of assets under management. He's like super connected. He knows everybody, and the idea that guy took 2 days out of his fucking schedule to come spend time here is absolutely incredible. But we were standing next to each other, and Kevin, actually, I'm not going to out who it is. Somebody came over and was like, "Hey, I have an idea for you." He's just like, "Why don't you do like next time, like cheaper tickets or free tickets so you can have like, people interested in entrepreneurship or entrepreneurs like that aren't yet successful can come." And Rick's like, "That's a terrible idea." He goes, "First of all, David's running a business here. And second of all," he goes, what they want me to do, and I didn't understand this till after the fact, because then they explicitly told me this, so I can tell you this too. He's just like, if you do that, all the high quality people, the people that like essentially young entrepreneurs are going to come and you're going to pitch these people. They get pitched every fucking day in their day job, 7 days a week. They want peers. They don't want subordinates. They're not coming for deal flow. They're coming to meet peers. And he's like, if you do that, I wouldn't go. And so one of the most shocking things was, this is an amazing guy. He's like one of the largest, this is the craziest feedback I got on the conference is, raise the price. He's like multiple times. There's one guy, he's like one of the largest real estate developers in, Australia. He owns wineries. He owns a ton of things. And he goes, we were talking, he's an older gentleman, and we were talking, and he's like, listen, he goes, and he's emailed me a bunch. Like, these are like, again, old school, old G. What I'm most proud of is like, these really successful people have been listening for years, because I have emails from them for years. Usually a lot of people churn out a podcast, and what he was telling me, he was just like, listen, he goes, I'm a huge supporter of everything you're doing. Your podcast has made a massive impact on how I'm running my business, right? So let's say the guy's worth, $500 million. What's a 1% impact from the podcast? Like, it's a substantial amount of money. It's probably greater than that, And he goes, everything you do. He's like, every single thing you've ever introduced, I buy. I'm just going to support you, everything. He goes, but what are you doing here? I go, what do you mean? He goes, $5,000? I go, yeah. And he goes, my plane ticket here was $30. He said $30,000 to fly here. And that happened a bunch of times. One guy was like, hey, I love the event. Next time you can't charge $5,000. I go, why? He goes, I Apple paid that shit. Right. And then another guy's like, I was going to send you an email. This is all happening while I'm on location. And he goes, one guy, he's like, man, and he goes, I'm so relieved. I go, why? He goes, I was going to send you an email. He's like, because when you said it was only going to be $5,000, it's like, is David going to have us in like a Motel 8? And then he goes, I don't think David would stay in a Motel 8. I was like, you're damn right, I'm not staying in a Motel 8. And he's just like, the price was so low. Chris from AG1, when it came out, first thing he texted me, he's like, yo, make this 10 or 15 and I'd want it more. And what happened was, again, I think there's like other conferences, Main Street Summit, it's like $1,000 ticket. It's a lot more like, I'm not building the essentially like in-person social network for founders. It's not like it's a luxury product because the people that are in this audience, in some cases, don't listen to any other podcasts. I was shocked at how many people I talked to. Like, I had never even listened to a podcast. I didn't know what a podcast was before you, but they had all these other founders and investors tell them about it. And essentially, like, the biggest feedback was like, a lot of these people were like, I have an unlimited budget if you can introduce me to other me's. And so you had that. That's why I'm like going to experiment with like smaller events, way higher ticket, like phenomenal locations. Every single place that I'm doing an event at, I want to be able to, like, I have to spend days there. Like I want to, that's the filter. Like, am I excited to go get on a plane and go to this spot? And so that was the biggest feedback where they're like, and me and Hinky were talking about this. He's like, listen, he goes, you could easily charge 10 at your first one. Don't do that. Charge half that, because what you want a small door and a long line out that door. And that's exactly what happened. So, I never tweeted it. I never posted on LinkedIn. I never sent it to my email list. I literally just did 2 ad reads at the end of 2 episodes. And we had, 4 times the amount of people apply that I had capacity for. So there's this huge demand here. And he's like, now you have this long line, you have this email list, this waiting list, and that's exactly what you want. And so, yeah, that's going to be, that's what we're going for. It's just like the podcast is free. It's a world-class education. If you're just starting on your entrepreneurial journey, listen to it over and over again on demand anytime you want. But all these like events I'm building are like for already wildly successful entrepreneurs and investors, because those people connecting produces that nonlinear return that I'm interested in facilitating.
Well, and then you have people who, for a decade, as they build, aspire to getting in that door, which is an incredible.
So yeah, I know who you're talking about. They hustled it out of me, and good. They're young like founders, and I want to help them. I was like, fuck it, I'll let them in.
Well, you talk about like this like kind of aspirational event that like people want to be at, that really, really talented people will be at, and you can choose to pay up for that. There's people who will see that and will think like, oh, I don't belong there. And then they just self-select out. And then it's funny that there's these kids who go like, I need to be there and I don't have the money, and get me there. And they completely self-select in.
And 2 of those kids wind up hustling, and they wind up talking to Sam Hinkie for like an hour. I'm like, dude, you are so generous. Like, and how valuable was that? Yeah, but the point is like, I'll lose that high-end audience if they're just getting hassled. If they're like, why the fuck would I come here? And again, this is the biggest thing about like, getting to meet just crazy people. Because obviously the smartest and richest people in the world read a lot. And if they read a lot, they're going to be attracted to podcasts like Founders. And the biggest thing is like, I've been able to build relationships with them. I've never asked them, any of them, for one fucking thing. Nothing, not an intro, not nothing ever. The only person I've asked something for is Patrick. When I called him, I was like, hey, and we were already friends. I was like, hey, I'm going to do an ad-based version of Founders, and I think it should be on your network. That's it. Because the whole point is like, dude, they get hit. And this is what people don't understand. I said this on stage. Me and Rick talked about this on stage. the worst thing you could possibly do is like for a high value person is fucking ask them. You should find ways to serve them. I talked about the greatest cold DM. I get cold DMs all the time. It's like, can I pick your brain? Can I take you to coffee? And those are like not usually successful. But the greatest DM was like, hey, I love your podcast. I'm a 21-year-old kid. I took an idea I heard in your podcast, made a video, and I got 10 million views. Can we talk about it? He's like, essentially what his DM was like, I can do this service for you. He did something first. And so like every single person, like I've never asked for a favor. And I think that's the biggest thing where like, you know, if you go to these events and you're just like, gimme, like that's just not, you don't build a relationship like that.
Never. Always give first and never have an expectation of return. It's funny to look back. Like I can see, I was very lucky that people told me that early in my career and I took it to heart because it's so funny now 10 years later that you can see you're just like Johnny Appleseed, like running around helping people, like giving them stuff. And then some small fraction of those generous moments will be remembered and returned to you in ways that you can't possibly fathom, you know, 1, 5, 10 years later. And it's so interesting now to see like the culmination of that happening in Scribe. Like I'm able to sit back and be like, this person that I met 10 years ago that we spent a few hours together, like just all of a sudden pop back up. And it's like, oh, hey, like it is just absolutely wild. And
even if there wasn't a return, like what I think people misunderstand, and it's something that's present in these biographies, is like what Rick said about he was with Sam Zell on his deathbed. And, you know, Sam's had $10 billion, like knew everybody in the world, built incredible businesses. He wasn't talking about his business achievements. When he knew he was dying and he fucking knew he was in his last hours, he talked about relationships. He talked about the experiences they had, the motorcycle trips they went on, the times they went to Malibu with their wives, like all that other stuff. It's like right now, I told you, it's like I've been telling no to every single other person for me to do to go on their podcast. I will get to them, but I just went through this fucking hell. Look at this. That's crazy. That's just the last 2 episodes. Do you understand? Like that's 1,600 pages. But I said yes to you because of our relationship, where it's just like, yeah, I'm not going to keep telling, I'm not going to keep pushing Eric off. Like I'm going to do that. I want to talk to Mitchell too. Like that's the important part. It's just like, that's really, it's just going to be more fun as we continue to go through life and build our businesses. It's just like, dude, I get high on the conversations we get to have, you know, and like the wins that you guys get, I feel like I'm living vicariously through you.
Or you get to go like give first, and the risk is that like you give something and somebody takes it and walks away. But then like what have you learned in that transaction? It's very easy.
So lucky to be surrounded by people that like if I spent my whole life making them successful, even if it didn't help me, I would feel great about how I use my life. Like I feel that way about my partners at Rolling Fun Bow now. I feel that way about you guys. I feel that way about like my wife. I feel that way about the founders I invest in. Like being able to just give with no fear of no reciprocation is like so satisfying.
I think there's an idea from your book on Naval. And then I want to talk about, there's an idea from this book on Intel that I think applies to Scribe. Don't let me forget about that. But because, you know, if you're public facing or if you already have a business, it's very obvious like how to build a network. But I think for some people might not know how to do that. I think Naval gave the best advice. And he's just like, I forgot the exact line, but he said something like, forget networking. He's like, just be great at something and the network will appear to you. And that's where I think people fuck up is they're like, you don't need a network to achieve anything. Try to achieve something first, or at least have a body of work to point to. It could be a demo. It could be, you know, a startup. It could be a podcast. It could be a book. But you need something to point to, a body of work. Like I did that. And then people, that's the way to make yourself easy to interface with. I think people are fucking up, but they're like, you know, every single person wants to get to Naval. You know how many fucking people send him messages? It's like, you know, his autoresponder. It's like, please stop sending me messages.
It's like, don't email me. Don't call me.
But if you're super talented, he'll find you. And so that is the biggest thing, man. I didn't go out, like, I'm an introvert. I did not go out and try to network anywhere. I sat in a room by myself for 5.5 years and read fucking 100,000 pages on History's Greatest Entrepreneurs.
You talk about, David, this like story of how Patrick did you this great favor of retweeting you and saying, hey, everyone, like go listen to this podcast. But like Patrick's you're not the only time Patrick's ever done that. And the thing is, you just had the goods at like, there's a lot of great podcasts, but you had the goods at the bottom of it where when people found it, I was saying that to, I found my start on Twitter by just kind of like, Nick Huber shining this light on me. And I was like, man, thank you. You've done so much for me. And he's like, dude, I've done that for like 100 people, but like, you know how many people have like really just done
you
the work
took the ball and ran with it. I mean, I like the mindset, like every day is an audition, like someone is watching. And if you perform greatness every day, someone will notice and someone will contribute to your success. Like that happens over and over and over again. It's just another way of saying what you did, David, which is like produce great work and people will be eager to support it.
There's I haven't read it yet, but I just finished this other book. Here's the book that I did yesterday, or I think I released the episode yesterday. And what's fascinating is the very end of the book. It talks about like all these people that worked at Disneyland when they were kids. Steve Martin, the comedian, isn't the name? Somebody made a book called like "Be So Good They Can't Ignore You," or maybe that was a phrase of his. I'm pretty sure it was Steve Martin, right?
I think it was Cal Newport, right? Is that?
No, this is like old school.
I know, but he might
have stolen it from Steve Martin.
He stole it from Steve Martin.
I think Steve Martin's book is called Born Standing Up. Maybe in the book he's talked about like his way to like succeed. Like,
be undeniable.
So good they can't ignore you. What's fascinating is that Steve Martin worked at Disney from the time he was like 10 years old to like 20. And so they said like he might be the most successful like Disney alumnus that worked, because there's a bunch of people that work there when they're kids. I'm like, who the hell was hiring 10-year-olds?
That's Ovitz at the Paramount lot too, you know, just walking around doing it for fun.
I talked to Ovitz on the phone the other day.
No.
Yeah.
Tell me more.
I was at breakfast with a friend and he called my friend and then he put the on speakerphone. He's like, hey, I'm actually sitting here with my friend David Senra. He does the Founders podcast. I don't know if you've heard of it. Mike Ovitz pauses for a minute. He goes, I listened to 4 of them yesterday. And he's like, I love the Vanderbilt one. And so now I have Mike Ovitz's number and I'm supposed to hang out with them and meet him and have dinner with them.
That's awesome.
Hilarious.
I read his book right as I was starting with Scribe. And I was like, oh, this is actually a really fascinating model for agency building, transforming industries. Like he's a really interesting story. I love that he's getting an adventure now too.
It's been 20 years
now.
In that book, it talked about meeting with Mark Andreessen and Ben Horowitz before they started A16Z. They're like, oh, we're just going to do the CAA playbook for venture. And so I think he was involved heavily there. He's a machine. I love these people. They're just monsters. I had this crazy 4-hour dinner with Daniel Ek, founder of Spotify, last week. It was me, Daniel, and Patrick. And Daniel gave me great advice. In fact, the next book I'm reading is because Daniel's like, hey, can I make a request? And I'm like, you're fucking Daniel Ek. Of course you can. And he's like, you got to read this book. And I ordered it immediately. But same thing. You leave these conversations and you're like, oh, like there's levels to this. Like once you see that, you're like, oh, you aspire to that. And Daniel's just unbelievably wise. Andrew Wilkinson tweeted out like, who's the wisest, but now that Charlie Munger's gone, who's the wisest person? He was looking for an older person, like 70, 80. And I almost responded, Daniel. I was like, like, I don't want to put that out there, but I left that super motivated. And like, he just talking to him for 4 hours, like, oh, this guy's wise. It's like, he's very wise in what he's doing. Same thing, like Ovitz, a fucking machine. Like,
I think, Toby Lukey, I think is like quite wise. Shane Parrish, wise. It's an interesting question. Peter Kaufman, but he keeps a pretty low profile.
I think Andrew wanted older people, like 70 or 80. Because usually you don't associate the term wisdom with somebody that's 40.
Yeah. Mitchell's got an interesting story to tell, which was like fresh off the press at Founders Only, and I heard him tell it like two or three different times. We were talking before we started recording about the midwit curve of like who's still CEOing and hustling every day and who is like in chairman mode among our friends. And I feel like Mitchell's like step by step going. It's like the march of just like building a new business and hiring a CEO. This is like an interesting, all of our conversations ended up being an interesting catalog of this march, but there's another big step in that I feel like will make an interesting story, Mitchell.
Melanie Baldridge, chairman mode. That's it.
Baby mode. What are you talking about?
What's that?
Baby Birth and children mode.
There you go. You heard it here first.
The most important of all jobs.
So I mean, that was that week we had announced that, Melanie was stepping aside at Ari Koseg, and we brought on Zach Prince, former CEO of BlockFi, to be the CEO, which, we're however far from that event, and it's going extremely well. He's a grinder. He's really, really smart. He came in and like immediately filled this kind of like VP of sales need that we had there, and we're building the sales team, and we're building out
personally, or he hired for it.
He's really like running it right now. We've hired a few people. We've hired a marketing guy and another salesperson, and so it's we're like, I think in hiring people, my experience has always been like, if you hire a person and they're not working out like 3 weeks in, there's no reason they're going to ever like magically turn it on at month 6 and start to work out. So I have sort of a short leash for hire. I think even before you hire somebody, especially a big role, like we work together probably 30, 40 hours in like, negotiating contracts, working with lawyers, employment agreements, blah, 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 blah. We had met all day in Houston talking about kind of the vision of the company and who we are and who he was and how we'd work together. We had a bunch of calls, and like people very, very quickly tell you who they are and how they're going to act. And he's come in and just, he's busting his ass and immediately like into action. He came in and was like, I'm worried that y'all are going to be too slow because there's like 4 of you and it's going to be like hard for you to govern. I think y'all are going to come in and try to slow me down. And we're like, this is why we would slow you down. This is why we wouldn't slow you down. Or what was that? It was the Home Depot book where he's like the dog fence, the like wireless fence. Like you're just going to run against the wireless fence and get shocked one day. That's how it's going to be. And we've kind of just done that of like, go do whatever you think is right. Report back to us. We still have a weekly call at this point, but it's been great. And so it was one of those things where, we all decided, hey, we need to hire a new CEO. And I'm like, oh, let's run a process. Let's hire recruiters. Let's kind of do all this stuff. And, Nick Huber's like, I'm going to go on Twitter and tweet that we need a CEO right now. And then, he has like 4 good candidates on the line. And we talked to several people doing several things. And Zach turned out to be the best one. And I'm like, well, can we slow this down? And he's like, no, this is the guy. Or you just it's roll. Tough to, it's tough to go slow and stuff like that because there aren't just talent, unlimited talented people out there, especially that talented. So
and Zach was interesting timing because like he came in with a chip on his shoulder, came out of a like crazy crypto story. I feel like which you took some smoke for. Yeah.
Well, I went to Zach and was like, hey, this is what I'm saying about you behind your back. And so is this all right? And he added a couple of points to the media training for me. I'm like, you have to tell me what to say, otherwise I'll just say anything, and that's not good. So, but that is I just told the truth, which we thought about. Obviously, Zach came from BlockFi, and BlockFi had a bad outcome. I've learned that VC-backed businesses have bad outcomes all the time. I mean, a lot of them, most of them go to zero. But when you take people's money, there's this higher standard, obviously. Zach acted in good faith. Zach did the right thing. Zach testified to Congress in the FTX trials. He obviously forewent a lot of his own funds inside of the platform. He took a secondary, but he did everything the right way that you could. And that's what I sat there and looked at the whole time. So he's like a monumental talent. I'll say that like people, you said, David, that there's like levels to this. And just like when you meet people who are operating at the like 0.1% level, it shows really, really quickly in how you operate with them and how you work with them. And it just was immediately obvious. Like, oh my gosh, this is by far and away the best guy we could possibly hire. And like what we did was we built Ari Koseg into a massively, massively scaling business that was big enough for somebody like that to then go, oh my gosh, what's happening here? What is the whole addressable market for this? Who are the competitors? How big are the competitors? And so he saw the vision pretty quickly too, that we can 10x this thing and all do really, really well. So
how do you want to spend your days? Because it goes to how Eric like introduced that question, where it's like much more of like the Zell chairman of everything, CEO of nothing was like his term for how he operated his career.
Yeah. Greg Eisenberg wrote this thing last week and he's like, the CEO is by far the worst job in the company. Like you can make like 70 grand and sort of have no responsibility, or you can be like a chairman and play golf every day. The CEO ultimately like has the responsibility. And
yeah, I don't know. Like playing golf every day sounds like a fucking nightmare to me. Like the people I admire are like, they get after it until they fucking die. Like they're not trying to take the easiest route in life. If people like want to do that, it's fine. But like Steve Jobs didn't play golf every day. Edwin Land did not play golf every day. David Ogilvy did not play golf every day. Like I don't like, you're here one time. Like, and some people don't give a shit, like legitimately don't give a shit. And I understand there's totally different. Like I mind my own business. Rule number 2 of the Senra family household, after always maintain situational awareness, is mind your own business. So I don't care what other people do for a living or how they want to live their lives. But like this idea, it's like, I'm here for one time. Like I study dead people for a living. So every fucking day I get to the end of that book yesterday and like it ends with Disney's death. One day that my death will be, like I'm going to get to the end of that time. And my day is not like, I'm not here to like take the easiest route or to fucking golf or to be leisure. Like I'm here to be the best in the world at what I'm doing. And then you get around other people like that. Like we just talked about Mike Ovitz. Do you think he was optimizing for days on the golf course?
No,
like,
no. He was the Patrick interview with Michael Ovitz was so good.
He was peeing in bottles on a.
I was literally about to say that he was pissing in bottles on a cross-country aircraft. He could barely make it with the gas, but he could not piss.
Did you guys see that Jerry Seinfeld interview in GQ that just came out? It was spread around Twitter. It's
great.
excellent. Like we need to pull out a couple quotes from this if you don't mind, like because I think it's like instructive. Like because there is this. This fucking meme in the entrepreneurship community where it's like, try to, get the most by doing the least. It's just like, no, how about I don't do that? And Jerry Seinfeld's like a fucking billionaire. Like all he does is keep reselling the same show and over again. And they're like, why the fuck are you working so hard? And I think I text Patrick because I thought he pulled out the best line in the entire article. And we can leave it in the show notes. It says, Jerry Seinfeld says movies are over. Here's why he made one anyone. It's in GQ, just came out. And Patrick pulled out to me, which was the best line. And Jerry talked about this. He's like, I know a ton of rich people that are not fulfilled. These leisurely rich fucking people. And so this is the best line. There's nothing I revile quite as much as a dilettante. I don't like doing something to a mediocre level. It's great to be 70 years old because you really get to preach with some authority. Get good at something. That's it. Everything else is bullshit. And he talks about all the fucking rich people that he knows. And Jerry Seinfeld knows a ton of rich people that are fucking unfulfilled because they have no meaning. They don't practice. Like we are meant. I truly believe that humans are put on this earth to build things for other people, not just fucking take as much money and gorge on it as much as we can. It's not gimme, take. It's like, what the fuck don't be proud of what you consume. You didn't make that. Who gives a shit? Be proud of what you built. and you can't fucking build anything on a goddamn golf course.
And the same thing, like, look, I want to be really, really involved in my kids' lives, and I want to be an example to my kids. And yeah, part of how you are involved with your kids is you show them that way of like, hey, this is how you make an impact in the world. This is how you find meaning in life. It's not.
It's activity. It's not leisure. When
it's not going on a 3-week vacation to the beach, right? And so,
I mean, if you like to do that, you like to do it. Me and Chris Powers were just talking about that. It's like the worst things our wives want us to do is fucking these beach vacations. Like, it just drives me fucking insane.
That's a reading vacation.
And so Sam Zell moved that point because he's like, I met him when he was 81. He knew he was dying. He knew he had cancer. It just wasn't public, right? I didn't know that. And he kept saying, he's like, I'm going to be doing deals till I die. And he was traveling all over the world because there's also a sense of meaning. It's not just building businesses. Like, you got to pick whatever the fuck you want to do. I don't know you. You have to pick it, right? But his thing was just like, he would travel all over the world on his dime, passing forward the lessons that he learned in his 60-year career to other entrepreneurs. That was something that was giving us meaning in addition to, buying these crazy businesses, still making tons and tons of money, even though he's trying to give a bunch of it away. But like, he loved the game for the game's sake. If you tell Sam, hey, you can't do deals, go fucking sit on the beach or go sit on the golf course, he'd fucking shoot himself.
So, cost seg, my hope is that Zach runs that business for a really, really long time and it's very, very successful and it spits out a ton of cash. And then, so people go, well, why don't you just stop there? And I'm like,
oh, Mitchell's
what would I do?
He's about to go build his magnum opus. Like, he's about to do the double down of all double downs, which is very exciting.
Well, I think like, and I have, my core business, Baldridge Financial, where we're like launching an RIA out of it. We're trying to expand what we do. Then we have better bookkeeping. And in some ways, everyone says, well, why don't you focus? And I do agree that focus is underrated, but in some ways I'm like, I am focused. I'm just trying. I read The Power Broker and I'm like, if Robert Moses focused, he would have built like a park on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. You know what I mean? And you could have spent years trying to build one park, or you can try to like build a large thing that can all work together. And I don't know the order of operations of like how to attack that, but we want to go build an RIA and a trust company that operates as like, a lot of big RIAs have promised this idea of like kind of one-stop shop money management, estate planning, tax efficiency, and I want to put it together. It's a lot of work. It's going to take a long time, and I don't know which side to take it at. So I'm just working at it every day. So that's what I'm doing. And I think like cost seg's a part of that, but really like, managing people's money, giving people, like tax planning, estate planning, tax saving, bookkeeping, all of that in one place, in one package it's tough work. I went on a podcast once a while ago and they were asking me about it and they were like, well, what's the trick to it? And I just was like, there's no trick. It's like really, really hard. I don't know what to say. And then that was kind of, it was like just dead air. It wasn't even a good answer, but it's just like, it's hard. That's the whole point, is that it's hard. Otherwise, somebody would have done it already and it would have been done really, really well. So I hope I can do it. I'm trying.
Who are who are kind of the, like, what's the lineage of greatness in this domain? Like, is Peter Maluk like Steve Jobs and Bogle, Edwin Land? Like, who else am I missing?
Yeah, I mean, Bogle's the goat. Or like, there were all these old banks, and there was the entire like stock market crisis of the 1920s, where people were. It was like crypto is today. People were just buying like shit they knew nothing about. And then obviously it became a lot more regulated over time. And I mean, over time, you read like A Random Walk Down Wall Street, you look at like Peter Lynch, Bogle, these people who were writing through the 50s, 60s, 70s, even a lot of Ben Graham of like taking these ideas of hey, these are companies. You're not buying price. You're ultimately buying something underlying the whole thing, and trying to teach the public about what to buy, how to buy, kind of what this all means. And so, I mean, but what I've tried to do is just like put this layer on top of it of like, this idea blew my mind, that you could go buy real estate or that this thing called a deferred tax liability existed, and that there was like ultimately this arc in your life of how you would like pay taxes, and that everyone will tell you there are people who can beat the market. Some do it, through systematic thinking. Some do it by luck. Some do it illegally. And like, but the market's been pretty good. I mean, the market returns like 9% for the last 60 years. And so it's ultimately like, you're not going to beat the market, especially if you don't spend all your time beating the market. And you're ultimately like, you don't even want to beat the market. You don't have to beat the market. What I've tried to do is like add this layer of like tax alpha on top by saying like, look, if you achieve tax diversification similar to how you would achieve kind of market diversification in your investments, you will have this layer of like tax alpha that is easier to achieve than trying to beat the market. And so that was a just kind of wild idea for me that I think, frankly, is a good enough idea to launch an entire investment strategy around. And then look, it's funny that you go online and like a bunch of people complain about fees that advisors charge and say that it's like a waste of money. And I agree that like there are advisors who charge fees that don't provide enough value. But as I've dealt with people who have more and more wealth, their financial lives, look, if you make more money than you can spend, then your financial administration and compliance is actually a burden, and you have to go like sort it out. And you already make more money than you're going to spend in your whole life. So now you have this burden of administrative compliance sitting on top of like, you've made the last dollar you're ever going to spend. So now you have like, it's like a storage problem.
Yeah, now
You're
it's
just
work.
like, you're like, now I have to work to go maintain this. Or like David, you talked about this with Sam Zell. It's like Sam Zell is making money faster than he can give it away. He's making money faster than he can go reinvest it. And Sam Zell had a zillion lawyers and accountants and advisors and or he had to, because it just becomes so complex. So the entire business, or like the thesis is like, how do you take this pain point that really bothers people and simplify it? And it's hard to do because it gets like more and more complicated every year and every law and every
So let's zoom way out. I'm curious, like how, and this question is for both of you, like how do you want to spend your days? Like what is an ideal day for Mitchell Baldridge? Like how do you want to spend your time? Like,
yeah. I was thinking about this because like, I think some people work way less than people used to work. And I think some people work way harder than people used to. Like when you read old books, like I was watching that documentary about Carl Icahn and like corporate rating all these old companies. And like those CEOs were making the most money you could make, and they weren't working very hard is at least his story about what they were doing. And it's like, I think you used to go to work and then go get drunk at lunch and then like sleep at your desk and then go like get drunk again at dinner and then go home. And it's like
roughly how my grandfather built his business.
Yeah. So it's like, there are people who just grind 12 hours a day now. And I think I think a lot of people waste their time. I think also a lot of people are just working on problems that take 12 hours a day to solve. But I want to have a good family life. I want to have a healthy body, and I want to have some control of my time at work to be able to work on things that are interesting to me. And then I need to like work on the things that keep it, keep the trains running. So like some of like, how do I want to spend my time doesn't like matter all that much, or like, I don't, like,
well, it sounds like it does. You just said it does.
Well, I think I think there are things I have to do that I don't want to do. I don't think you get to just have an entire life of doing, or like you talked about, like the dilettantes of money spending. It's like there are dilettantes of like, if I wake up, if your baby's crying in the middle of the night and you don't like want to go take care of your baby, you just have to get up and take care of your baby, because that's like that. And so there is that like metaphor extends out into like, there are things at work that I have to do that I don't want to do. I try to always do them and then go like, how do I never do this
again? What are the things that you don't like to do? Because you do have the position where like you do have other people. You're in a good position where you have other people running all of your businesses right now, the 3 businesses, right?
And it's really just like when things break inside the business and I have to travel into the center of the business.
So do you
I go with the CEO of the business and go, and the managers of that business and go like, how do we organize this so this never happens ever again? Like, so what do we need to do?
You would prefer like, you like jumping in and out. Like, okay, where am I most needed? Today might be Ari Kosek. Next Tuesday, it might be Baldridge CPA. The day after, it might be better bookkeeping. Like, that's how you like, that's what I mean. Like, how do you want to spend your time? Like, I like having multiple
ideate
things.
I like to ideate and tinker and build like at a high level and continue to like build a roadmap and have things just happen. And if that just happened forever, I would just keep building forward forever.
So I think that's your answer.
So ideation and tinkering and just kind of like thinking is my favorite thing to do. And then when that breaks, I prefer to think at a high level than have to jump in and deal with operations. But like, I think you have to. Like, how do you think about that, Eric? And as far as like, you have a few things going on too. You had this podcast, you have the fun, but really it's Scribe today, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think of it as kind of like 2 big buckets, which is I like to learn things and I like to apply them, see if what I learned is correct. Learning takes a form of like reading, listening, or talking to smart people, and applying usually takes the form of writing and publishing or operating, which is in my case, a CEO, usually like writing or talking to people, talking to the team. The decision making or delegating of decision making inside, like that's the function of the work. And I love doing both of those things. Like, as long as you have the ability to kind of choose the people around you that you spend your time with, choose the inputs and outputs, and feel like you're working on an important idea or ideas, which I do. Like, I love writing books. I love helping people write books. I think books are sacred. I have a vision of a, abundant utopian future that drives sort of as much of the book writing as I can do and as much of the investing as I can do, and is a filter sort of indirectly on like who I spend time with. And if I think that they are pro-social and pro like the future that I see and making the world a better place, like that's all of how I choose to spend my time.
You had a pretty incendiary text yesterday about how you think that maybe mini storage hasn't added as much value to the world as certain other asset classes, which
I'm lost. I don't understand.
Eric tweeted. Eric was talking about essentially if the same tax breaks that were given to real estate were given to venture capital and like real hard tech, would the world be moving faster? You know, so I think I just was razzing him. Sorry guys.
Do you want to expand on that tweet?
Like I know venture capital gets a like weird bad reputation, but in most cases, or in a lot of cases, is the capital and risk behind technological innovations that make life better for a lot of people. And I don't know that you could argue quite the same impact comes from self-storage, or real estate investing, but like real estate has arranged itself a lot of extremely advantaged tax things. And so there's a lot of people who are like channeling money into real estate, even though it's a little bit of a like, it's not quite zero sum. Like, I'm not going to say that there's no benefit to giving people great places to live, but like, does it need the advantages that it has?
So they're taking money away
as good for civilization,
taking money away from new business, like funding new businesses to get advantages of the tax that real estate provides. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think if more money went into building new businesses and building new technology-centric businesses, civilization as a whole would be better. And
I had a weird thought that popped to mind when I was listening to you speak. What do you think is the best business book of all time? Not biography, business book of all time. My answer to that question, and I'm curious what you think, is 0 to 1. If you can only read one book, I think Peter Thiel's 0 to 1 is the best. Like, it tells a little bit of his own story, but it's definitely not a biography. It's not an autobiography. And one of the things I most love, I love what you just said. You said books are sacred. You're dedicating your time and your effort, your energy, your finances to this. And I agree, obviously. I think it's one of the greatest creations. And we know it's one of the greatest creations because they've lasted 5,000 years. You know, shitty inventions don't last a long time. And one of the things I most love about Peter's perspective in that book is it's like, you should have like a definitive view on the world and believe that the world is malleable and that you can actually change it. It's not luck, and it's not all luck. It's not all randomness. And I guess that's what I was taking away from Jerry Seinfeld. And again, it doesn't mean that you have to be super fucking serious about your work. His thing is like, I want to be a really good stand-up comedian so I can make people laugh, because making people laugh is a great form of entertainment, you know? But I think it's all tied to that idea. It's like the difference between, I see a lot of entrepreneurs kind of like just like go through life, or like life maybe happens to them. Life doesn't happen to Peter Thiel. He happened to life. Like he happened to a lot of people's lives. Yes. He did and his message is like, you can have a definitive plan. And like, I was sitting here thinking, you mentioned earlier, you were listening to a bunch of, Founders episodes before we started recording, and like writing down these like little maxims that pop up. And one of the things that really resonated with me when I was doing this Disney, this multiple part series on Walt Disney, is he had a fucking definitive life. Say what you want about him. That dude had a definitive view of life. And there's a line, there was something I said in the podcast by accident. I was just thinking about the highlight in the note that I wanted to talk about. And every single time he wanted to create something new, right? Where there was like, he grew up thinking he was going to be a newspaper cartoonist. I tweeted his first business card. He was like 18. He's like, hire me. I'm going to be a newspaper cartoonist. Then this new industry of animation comes. He's like, oh wait, I can actually bring life to cartoons. That's better. When he jumped into animation, it was less than 2 decades old. And he did that on purpose because he wanted to find somewhere in an industry where he could make a big impact and he could be not just one of the best, but the best, right? And you see this over and over again. Then he does like shorts. Then he does 7 minutes. Then he does Snow White, the first feature length cartoon. He did the first sound cartoon. He did all this other stuff. Then he does Disneyland. Every single time he's trying to do something, people around him are like, this is stupid. This is a dumb idea. This won't work. And in many cases, he's persevering through, like, you know, he pushed all his chips in multiple times, borrowed against second mortgages, life insurance, sold a vacation house, everything, went all in. And one thing I realized, like, he's studying the life of Disney, it's like he didn't look around. He looked in. And I think that's the biggest thing. I don't give a fuck what other people do for a living. All I'm saying is, like, are you actually doing something that's authentic to you? Do you actually want that life? Because there's a ton of people, and we know them. We're all friends with them, that had this fantastic outcome. They got 50 million, 150 million, 200 million deposited into their account, and they tell you the same thing. I was happy for a day, a fucking day. and then they go into depression. And that sounds silly. Walt Disney, at the time when he's in his 40s, he is world famous. He's innovated in multiple categories. He is fucking depressed. He is miserable. And why? Because he doesn't have any meaning in his life. That's what Disneyland gave him. It gave back his meaning. And so I think that ties together with Peter Thiel. That's the reason I asked you, is like, how do you guys want to spend your days? It's just like, I think we'd all be beneficial. It's like having a definitive view on life, saying this, what I'm doing, the work I'm doing, I know is important because it benefits a lot. It's an in service to other people. One of my greatest maxims from the history of entrepreneurship is that from Henry Ford, money comes naturally as a result of service. And so I just love that idea. It's like, hey, I find books sacred, and I think innovation is sacred. So if you look at how Eric spends his time, it's like, I'm going to write more books, which are fucking fantastic. By the way, I have, I think 40 extra copies of your Naval book in my house now because I bought like 200 or whatever it was. A bunch of people that take them for founders only. So everybody comes over and is like, here's a book for you. But I love what you just said. We were like, hey, I think books are sacred. I'm going to write more books because your Naval book changed my fucking life. It changed the life of you. This is something we got to talk about, the Intel Trinity book too. And then you're saying like, hey, then when I'm not doing, I want to make investments to do innovation. Same thing with, we just heard a version of that. And you have to read between what Mitchell was saying. We know him, so we can read between his lines. It's just like, I have this huge advantage. I think taxes is, you use the word alpha. It's just like, why doesn't this thing exist? Like, helping people save more money on taxes so then they could do whatever they want with their wealth is actually a service to the world.
Yeah. I did a college presentation, by the way. So David, you speak at Harvard. I speak at the University of Houston, Bauer College. We are not the same. I'll tell you that. And my college presentation, I tweeted about this back and forth with Moses Kagan. I literally said, How to Get Rich Without Getting Lucky by Naval Ravikant, adapted by Eric Jorgensen. And that was the framework of the entire exercise. Like, if you're talking to a 21-year-old, 22-year-old kid, these were all kids who are about to graduate in like 6 months, and you're just... what you're talking about from 0 to 1 and what you're talking about with the Almanac are very much the same principles of specific knowledge, leverage, accountability, long-term thinking, independent, first principle thinking. Like, it really, the whole, like, this also even goes back to like before in like 2010, I found that book, what do you call Think
Bible?
and Grow Rich, which is like a corny, like self-help book, but it is the same thing. It's like, have a desire, think about what you want, and just implant it in your mind and go make it happen, and don't even waver,
And I think the maxim there is like, don't look around, look in. It only makes a difference. The people do their best work, like when it's authentic to them. It's like a true desire that they have, not what their mom thinks or their friend thinks or, anything like that.
And it takes space and time, and weirdly also sometimes crises, to see that clearly. Like, I remember,
it's our friend Jeremy Gaffon has this great line when he did it on Patrick's podcast, Post Falls. Like, it's pre and post fall. You're not going to find your life's work until there's going to be a fall.
I got to drop the best.
We're in a group chat called Post Falls, and everybody in that group chat is post fall.
At the Founders Only Summit, Jeremy couldn't be there because he had food poisoning. And when he popped out at the end, I go, Jeremy, are you post fall now? Would you say, have you been through the ordeal?
It's funny because he landed way before I did, and he's like, "Is anybody there?" It's like, "Yeah, Clayton's there. There's the whole crew's there. They'll let you in."
I'm gonna go have a burrito bowl.
Yeah, and then I couldn't touch it. I was like, "What happened?" And then somebody we had to do a wellness check. I was like, "Dude, like, I don't want to mess with the guy, but like, what if he died in there? Like, we have to do a wellness check."
I literally DM'd him. I was like, "Hey, Jeremy, we could get you like a mobile IV or something. Like, if you need a doctor, we'll get you a doctor."
I think the way I found out really what happened, I think his wife texted my wife or something. I can't remember exactly. I was like, "Oh shit!" Like, I thought he was like, I don't even know what I thought. But yeah, that's fucking hilarious. I do want to bring up one thing, because I know this because we've talked privately, and you've said so somewhat on this podcast too. But like, there's this line. So I went back and I was rereading my highlights for this book that I haven't done in like, I don't know, 7 years, some shit like that. and I'm going to reread it. It's called The Intel Trinity. It's written by this guy named Michael S. Malone, who's also written a bunch of other books on early Silicon Valley history. And I was rereading this because it's only like 40 highlights, and it's amazing how much like came back to memory. And I got to a point at the end where I was like, man, this makes me think of Eric Jorgensen. And they talked about the company is like it's almost like dying. The main thing, well, I'll get to the main point, that the market has to be educated. And there's many such cases in the history of entrepreneurship where like it's not that your aim is wrong. It's not that your target is wrong. It's like you just haven't educated the market yet. And so Andy Grove is the one running Intel at the time, and Robert Noyce comes up with them because he's like, we're going to start another project. And Andy Grove later remembered thinking, he says, go away. We do not have time for this. What kind of company starts new projects when its very survival was at stake? And the answer is a company that can't resist a great technological breakthrough. And that was the invention of the microprocessor. And one of the biggest things, and it's fucking crazy how powerful ideas are, right? Because I read that entire book. It's probably 400 pages. You know, I did it probably back in 2016. And this idea, the reason I went to go look up my old highlights and to reread them is because this fucking idea stayed in my brain, that the market has to be educated. If you're introducing something brand new, right, you have to educate them. And I thought about this, where like, I know how world-changing Scribe Media was to you, Eric, because we're friends and because we've had private hours and hours and hours of private conversations, right? And I can't help but thinking, and I'm going to try to help you do this with like this trusted partner network that I'm building out that Scribe's going to be a part of, where I can like help educate the market too. Of like, hey, even if you're not like, you have a great line where it's like, you know, books don't have to make money to make money. Is that the line?
Books don't have to make money to make you money.
Okay. And I was like, more, again, it goes back to having a body of work, having this like proof of work that you can point to, even if you're not trying to sell the book. And so I'm going to read two highlights from the Intel Trinity that really is like, you know, it's important because I always say like, you know what, the reason I started this conversation was like, how do you want to spend your time, Mitchell? How do you want to spend your time, Eric? I talked about maybe before we were recording, I can't remember. It's like the opportunity cost for me doing anything other than reading, making podcasts is too high. It's like, that's how I want to spend my time. But it says McKenna quickly discovered that the marketplace wasn't just confused by the concept of the microprocessor, but was actually frightened by its implications. Many of my engineering friends scoffed at it. I was the fucking microprocessor, one of the greatest inventions of all time. And engineers like this is ridiculous. His solution, the market had to be educated. So what did Intel do? Intel was run. The reason the book's called the Intel Trinity, because it's Gordon Moore, Bob Noyce, and fucking Andy Grove. And it says at one point, Intel was conducting more seminars and workshops on how to use the microprocessor than the local junior college's total catalog of courses. Bob Noyce, Gordon Moore, and Andy Grove became part of a traveling educational roadshow. Everyone who could walk and talk became educators. Here's the punchline. It worked. Was not a bad product. The market just had to be educated. And you're already fucking smashing it. I think you said you had like 69 books, and I saw this tweet from you on 420. Was it like, is that right?
It's up to 75 now, but yeah. We're flying through books.
But I think, especially for like, the audience would listen to something like this. The audience would listen to founders, any kind of like executive, investor, entrepreneur. It's like, you have ideas. You have this whole experience. Even if you're only 10 or 15 years into your career, you have these thoughts. Why don't you just use a service that organizes them? And you have a body of work that you could point to, and you can, I think it becomes such a powerful unlock for people's careers. They just have to be educated on it because it's a weird thing. Like before you told me this, I was like, everybody, like you came to me, you should write a book. Jim O'Shaughnessy came to me, you should write a book. I'm like, I'm going to podcast. I'm not going to write a book. She's like, oh, we can actually do this for you, with you. And I was like, what are you talking about? Like, I had to be educated. And again, then it completely unlocks it. It's like, oh, this idea from Intel Trinity, that concept right there that I used for the invention of microprocessor would be very beneficial to my friend Eric Jorgensen's business.
Thank you. Yes, I should work much harder on educating the market because you're completely correct. And you hit this drum hard in the most recent, like all the directors you're talking about, the entrepreneurs who don't want to write books, don't want to take the time to write books, but have so much to teach and they want to give back to the next generation of entrepreneurs. And like, we can do that very, very easily. You don't have to spend 1,000 hours at a keyboard to capture the knowledge that you have and give it to the world, give it to the next generation of entrepreneurs.
My fucking jujitsu instructors, right? they started listening to the podcast and they're like, I love that episode. All of them loved the Naval episode. And I was like, dude, I know that, like, that's my friend Eric. Like we became friends because of that. And they had a teacher. They've been doing jiu-jitsu. They're from Brazil. They've been doing jiu-jitsu for 40 years. And their teacher was teaching classes up until he was 90. And there's pictures of him everywhere. He's like huge influence on the way they teach. And they have a curriculum at the school. And I was like, do you guys have like, it's in your mind, right? But like, where can I read about it? They're like, no, there's nothing like that. I go, why don't you guys write the book? And they're like, well, we're kind of busy. Like, it's a great idea, but like we're working every day for on this teaching people jiu-jitsu. I was like, well, my friend Eric's company can do it. You just mentioned the Naval. I told you that. I think I texted this to you. I was like, they can do that for you. They would literally just interview you, send them the material. You own everything. You have final cut, maybe. Like you control everything that's in the book. Nothing gets in the book that's you don't want in there. And so I think they're going to do it and they want to also do a second one because their father was like unbelievable. Like when their father passed away, his 3 sons, the way they speak about their father, and these are all grown men with their own kids now, they're in their anywhere from like 50 to 40, or I think the younger one's like 35. And I'm like, man, I hope my kids talk about me like that after I'm gone. And same thing. They're like, he taught us so many lessons. And I was like, why don't you, even if you don't want to make this book, because they may not make that one publicly available, but they want it for their entire family. So it's like the catalog, the wisdom of their father, and to make sure it's disseminated through multiple generations. I'm like, that's another use case right there.
2 things. One, my wife's family, my wife's maiden name is Bujnoch, Bujnoch. They like came from Czechoslovakia into this small town, and they have this hardbound, leather book of the family's history, which is like the most powerful thing you can have to hold a family legacy together. I went to this conference and saw Sam Parr there, and he was just talking about on MFM, there's this guy, I'm a YouTube Shorts like addict. I watch it to wind down. And there's this guy, Bobby Flav, who like walks through Costco and he's like, eat this, not this thing. You see all these seed oils, blah, blah, blah. And they were talking about him on MFM. And I talked to Sam and I was like, I love that guy, Bobby Flav. He's just a weirdo. I was like, there is this world where I could do YouTube Shorts, but I can't do YouTube Shorts. And he's like, dude, you could do exactly what he does. Just, you could take the 150 topics of tax and do YouTube Shorts. And I was like, yeah, they wouldn't be great. Whatever. I'm not going to do it. But he said, specific knowledge, or the knowledge gap, is just the biggest thing of like what you know versus what other people know. And I project my own knowledge onto other people, and they just don't have it because they just haven't been
to forget that. Yeah. The things that you know are still valuable, and other people don't yet know them.
And like, I can't, David, go read your Brazilian jiu-jitsu instructor's book and then go know how to choke somebody any better.
It's philosophy. It has nothing to do with moves.
But
it'd be like Naval. That book is really like Naval's philosophy on life.
Yeah. And like, I can't even read the Naval book and become like, so hear me out. Like, I don't read the Naval book in like 2 hours and become a different person the moment I set it down, but it does set you on this, like, yeah. I did choke somebody right after, oddly. But yeah, no, it
takes reps. It takes reps.
No, I don't understand what Mitchell's trying to say.
What I'm trying to say is that people think if they give away their ideas, that their ideas lose power. And obviously it's the opposite, that if you give away your ideas gain power. Like that people think that their ideas are scarce, or that if you say them out loud, people will copy you, or people will like steal what you do. And it's just like there's almost nothing you can give away in your business by writing a book that will take somebody who would have been a customer and make them not a customer. It actually further entrenches people into wanting to use your product and your service, because now you're the expert.
I mean, the perfect example of this is this book that came out in 1965. I've done 2 episodes on. It's Confessions of an Advertising Man.
There you go.
David Ogilvy. He writes down how he built his ideas on advertising. He publishes it, and the end result is a few years later, he goes from like a rather unknown person on Madison Avenue to one of the top 5 or top 10. Yeah, excellent. Look how smooth he looks too.
Yeah, it is. So dapper.
Yeah, and it's just like he literally like, and then he does it again in 1983 or 1984, and he publishes Ogilvy on advertising.
And when he writes that book, he's basically like, hey, when I wrote the other book, I was nothing. And now I'm like, Shell's my account, you know?
And it was hilarious.
Yeah.
And he was just like, he's like, it proves, you know, he's the best writer that I've ever read. Like, I've been thinking about
good advertisers are good writers in ways that writers themselves are
anybody
not at
building a company that can listen to my fucking voice right now. Go order the unpublished David Ogilvy. I think it's episode 189 of Founders. It is a collection of 50 years of internal memos that was never meant to be for the external world. Internal memos, and letters that David Ogilvy is writing for his employees. It's the best business communication you can ever write. Like if we do this book with Scribe, it's going to look. This is why I'm obsessed with bullet points and numbers and look at all the stuff I tweet. That's David Ogilvy. It's just like there's no fat anywhere. It's all brevity. It's like compact ideas. It's just there's a great line in the Disneyland book I just did that I didn't include in the podcast, but it said that Walt Disney would have Napoleonic brevity because Napoleon spoke about this a lot. David Ogilvy would speak about it. Churchill would speak about it. Cut your words in half. Like you're talking, like you need to use the smallest amount of words to get the idea across, right?
Just like what Paul Graham is preaching right now too.
Yeah. And, so Disney's like, he's like, people would see him at Disneyland after it opened because he was like, oh, I want to work on something that's living. This is why I resonated with that fucking book so much because like Founders is my Disneyland. He like started this because he got annoyed because he would do a movie. Then once the movie's gone, he can't improve it anymore. He's like, I want to work on something living and breathing. Warren Buffett talked about this, like sitting on his back. And it's like he's painting the Sistine Chapel. And he's just like, this is my masterpiece. It'll never be done. And don't come over here and tell me this area should be blue. Like I want it yellow. This is how I want it to be done. Like I want to work on something living and breathing and something I can change and improve on. So people came across him sitting, Disney was fucking on the move all the time. He's just sitting there staring. And his employee goes up to him. He's like, what are you doing? He's like, I'm looking at my mountain. And the guy's like, there's a fucking pile of dirt there. It's like, what are you talking about? So he goes and he visits Matterhorn, the famous mountain. He sends back, so he's in like the little shop at the bottom of the mountain. He sends back a postcard to one of his art directors. It's a picture of Matterhorn. On the back, build this. That's it. But I'm telling you, the unpublished David Ogilvy, I've given that book as a gift. Probably it's up there. I give the Naval book as most as a gift, River of Doubt, and then unpublished David Ogilvy is the only ones that can pop to my mind. But when I do this Founders book or when we do this Founders book together, like that's what it's going to be. It's not going to be fucking, it's like, I love the way he writes. Very short, bullet points. I love fucking numbered lists. It's just so easy to read. I was, the founder, have you guys been using Perplexity? Oh, you guys got to download the app. Between Perplexity and ChatGPT, I don't use Google at all anymore. And I saw the founder of Perplexity, who also has a good episode on Invest Like the Best with Patrick. I recommend you guys listening to if you haven't heard it already. And one of the early beta testers and now early investors in Perplexity was Daniel Gross. And when they just announced this new fundraising, he released the initial feedback that Daniel Gross gave him on the product. And the email is a numbered list. It starts at 0, goes 0, 1, 2, 3. And you read it and it's like, oh, you don't get to the end of that email. Like, I wonder what he fucking means. There's something in the human mind where you put a number on it or like it's very easy to understand. And you go through David Ogilvy is a better writer than anybody on Twitter. I don't think that's fact. Like he made his living through writing words, right? Maybe not the best, whatever. Maybe that's exaggeration, but he's if he was on Twitter today, he'd be fucking killing it. That's the point. And you go and look at like how he communicated with people when he wasn't writing for an external audience. And that it's nothing but short letters, short memos, numbered lists, bullet point lists. He was trained by one of the guys. He said he was able to master the terse memo because he was trained by one of the guys. He worked for the British version of CIA or whatever when he was a young man. And the guy that he worked for was one of Ian Fleming's inspirations for James Bond. And he said that the guy would have 3 responses. You'd send him something, he'd respond back, yes, no, or talk. And talk meant come see me. But that's it. That's like, there's nothing else like yes, no, talk. So yeah, I just love, I love that idea. Like you see it over and over again. He's like, build this. He's like, what is it? We're building Matterhorn. I think it's 1/15th to scale. And that's what they did.
It's also just like, there are things in life that you just have to, I was talking to a friend of mine and he was talking about how like his kid was having these problems and every night it was like taking 3 hours to put his kid to bed. And I was like, you just have to fix that. Like, I don't know what you have to do. I don't know who you have to see, but like your whole life, you go to work, you wake up, you do all this stuff, you spend these time. You can't have your life be this thing of every day, 3 hours of your day is that your kid won't go to sleep. Like, and the best entrepreneurs are just like, this just has to be, they're just high agency. Like, build this. Like, if you need more help, either come find me or let's find someone who doesn't need more help, I guess. But like, we are, Walt Disney was building the Matterhorn no matter what. Like, you weren't going to get in between him and the Matterhorn.
I will say there's one counter example to the idea where like, hey, if you put it down in a book, like, David Ogilvy wrote Confessions of an Advertising Man, said exactly how he thought about advertising. Claude Hopkins wrote Scientific Advertising. Now that's different because Claude Hopkins wrote the blueprint for how Albert Lasker made more money in advertising than in the advertising industry than anybody else in history. Claude Hopkins worked for him. And he saw the book that Claude Hopkins was making, and he insisted that they put it away in the safe for 20 years. So there is some examples where there are actually secrets. Same thing with Disney, where like Steve Jobs starts doing this extensive study into what the business model of Pixar is once they switch from trying to sell the Pixar image computer to actually making the world's first computer animated film. And he wanted to know, like, what are the economics? Like, what is the business model of animation? And he realizes like it was so hard to get the information because it's like, he has this great line. He's like, there's only one company that has ever done animation well, and it's Disney. He's like, you can't go to the library and take out a book called The Business Model of Animation because there's only one company that's ever done it well. It's Disney, and they don't want anybody else to know how lucrative it is. So there is exceptions to everything, obviously. David Ogilvy's like, here's all my secrets. Walt Disney's like,
well, look, if you're trying to get customers to buy from you, that's what, and you give away the framework of how you do the work, or like Girdley said this on I don't know if it was on a podcast somewhere, but he was basically like, look, I have this business. It's called Dura Software. We buy these certain types of vertical SaaS companies. We have this specific way in this specific market on how we buy these things. I'm not going to tell you how we do it because I will never be able to buy one again. And every time I buy one, I make like $5 million. So no, call me, say I don't have a, what do you call it? Like or not positive sum, or say I don't have like a abundance mindset. I'm not going to tell you how our secret sauce is done. But
that is a much more common, I think what Ogilvy did was marketing.
I think that's what a book is marketing.
It's why Scribe could be a very powerful tool for the people we're describing. But the maxim that appears over and over again, if you listen to founders, is bad boys move in silence. They find an edge and then they shut up about it. That's way more common than the let me just lay everything out on the table.
The best is in Mad Men when Roger Sterling is reading Ogilvy on advertising, and then he starts to write his own book, Sterling's Gold. So the idea is how that like book rippled through Madison Avenue. Everyone read it, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, this is genius!" And I don't think.
Well, and then they're all chasing him.
Yeah.
Like then they're playing his game because he wrote the book.
He wrote the book on it. And I tell you this all the time, David, and I believe this we don't know what was true and not true inside of Ogilvy on advertising or any of these books because they get to write the book. So you get to cut this out, but, leave it in. Bill Murray in the 92nd Street why episode with Ovitz goes, why did you write all those lies in your book? That's like the opening. And Ovitz is basically like, I wrote the fucking book. You write your own book, whatever. Like, you can refute me in your book, but this is my book.
I mean, the larger issue you're talking about is like, people don't see things as they are. We see them as we are. And so like, we could write a book on this 2-hour or whatever long conversation we've had, and every single person's going to have a different perspective. Like,
yeah. And if you get the book to market and everyone buys it and it's very, very readable and it's a great book, you will get to own the...
Michael Ovitz did notoriously sort of create legend around himself.
He founded Andreessen Horowitz.
But it is very true. Like the rebuttal to any critique of your book is go write your own book.
Yeah.
Like, don't tell me what mine should be. You go do yours.
You go do your, I have mine, you do yours, and everyone can read both of them and then they can decide. So I think, I don't think you should go write your trade secrets in a book. I think in a lot of ways, if you just went and wrote out your trade secrets, people wouldn't be able to replicate what you do.
That's basically what Scribe has given away, everything that we know about how to publish books for free, because the people who are going to hire us to do all the hard work are not the people who are going to try to save every penny and do it themselves. But if the people who want to do it themselves, like, can't afford our services, fine. Like, go do it yourself. We'll help you. It's like, you can build your own house if you want to spend an ass load of time on YouTube and you don't mind things like maybe not working so great for a little while. But if you want a professional to build your house and you want it to be great and you want to hire somebody that's done it 2,000 times before, like, here we are.
No one's going to be able to reproduce founders' podcasts unless they have a time machine and they have like, you could tell everybody exactly what to do we could reverse.
You basically do, David. Like, you know, it's no secret.
It's funny. So we all love John Coogan. He was another, I think he's actually the tallest person. He might have been the tallest person at Founders Only. He was in town like 2 weeks ago.
I'm
pretty sure,
he's
right?
hilarious.
But he is
he's enormous.
Yeah, he's like 6'9", almost 7 feet tall. And he has this podcast, which he's not updating anymore. And I actually liked it. It's a solo podcast. It's called Power Law. And we were at dinner and I was like, why did you stop doing this? And he's like, it's different. It's like, it's kind of weird because I'm doing kind of like the founders version of, but people are like alive. And so then like, I'll do an episode on them and then they hear it and then they reach out and some are happy and some are not. And he's like, you don't have to deal with this. Like, Rockefeller's not sending you an email. Right. But I think John is super talented and I think there should be more solo podcasts, and he's an incredible researcher by nature. That's just how he is. And so I want this product. I was like, why don't you do that? And he's like, I was like, so then do it on dead people. And he goes, no. He goes, then I'd be competing with founders. I was like, well, and I explained to him, I was like, picking a podcast is more like picking a friend. So like, it wouldn't be like founders, it'd be your version of that. And he's like, it's too close. I don't want to compete with you. And then I go, why not? He goes, because you're a fucking psychopath. And I was like, oh, I didn't know that was part of my brand. That's fucking hilarious. That's a good little moat to have. It's like, you sure you want to do this?
You didn't know that was part of your brand?
No.
It's a great reputation to have.
The funniest thing was when the first time we met in person, because we had talked a bunch, and there was that Capital Camp, and you're like, your simmering energy is like hard to deal with in person. You said some weird shit. It was hilarious. It's like, just like there's like something underneath, like almost like I'm Satan or something. There's like flames coming from underneath.
I said that?
You said something like, yeah, you're just like your simmering energy in person. It's like very like, and you didn't say hard to deal with, but you said something along the line. It wasn't an insult, but it's just like,
yeah, no, I would,
yeah.
It is as advertised, I would say. Like, it's not like you get like revved up and then like record a podcast and you're like that 1 hour a week. You are like that all the fucking time, which is this authentic is and beautiful and energizing and amazing. And that's why you're the ultimate like run through a wall dose of energy friend. If
you saw, like you see all the stuff that happens with like podcasters that try to get like canceled. I don't even know if that's a thing anymore, but like what happened with Joe Rogan, like that they try to cancel him. He had 2 million subscribers on Spotify, went from 12 million to 14 million. Right?
I mean, I'm sure.
And then the Huberman thing was like,
everyone's like, this guy seems cool.
The Huberman thing was like perfect because like they didn't even like it's just like, I'm going to post through this. I'm going to keep going through this. I talked to Huberman's partner, Rob, and I was like, this is the best thing ever. It's like, whatever, this is like gossip. This is like personal life stuff, but they can't touch his body of work. It'd be a big problem if they were like, he was falsifying studies or some weird, because you're going to him for health advice. And the result was just what Mitchell said. It's like, wait a minute, this guy could do this. Like he's got all this energy at 48 years old. Like,
sounds exhausting.
Yeah. But my point being is, it's like, and then what happened is the same thing that happens every time. It's like, listen, the person's going to read that article. If you spend so much time listening to Huberman or Joe or anybody, or you listen to Smart Friends or anything, it's like, that person. That's the magic of podcasting. It's like it's hard to put on a show and not be who you are. And then the end result of that is like, some people are not going to like you, which is fine. But the people that really like you, there's nobody that's listened to Joe Rogan for, what does that guy have? He's probably got, I don't know, 2,000 episodes, something like that, 3 hours long, like 15 years. It's like, dude, if you listen to Joe, there's nothing that CNN or another publication can tell you about Joe that you don't know. And so it's almost like this weird thing where like the people saying, I'm never going to listen to Huberman again. They weren't listening. They like the crossover between New York Magazine and Huberman is probably not there, Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing where I talk to friends that have like super scripted podcasts. I'm like, listen, you could do that, but like you're taking away one of the superpowers, and like you're building. The podcast give you the ability to build relationships at scale as long as you're authentic, because there's nothing worse than like meeting somebody that you saw videos of or heard somewhere, and then they're completely different. Like that's one of the things I got most from meeting Charlie Munger and Sam Zell before they both died. It's like, they're the exact same person on stage that they were in person. And like, that just immediately, if you like them on stage, you're going to love them in person. And like, that's a huge unlock.
You see the two things, like I've met enough people where you're like, hey, I love what you do on Twitter. And they're like, oh, that's not me at all. Like, that's the first thing they say. And you're like, what? Then what are you doing? The other one is, my pet hobby horse is like the people who, their origin story is how they're like a criminal. Like you see that in business biographies all the time where they're like, yeah, the first thing I did was like something totally unethical and illegal, but I got through it. Haha. What do you think about that, David? Of like,
there's like,
does that bother you?
No.
Yeah.
One of the funniest ones. I want people to be who they are. Like when I say I mind my own business, like I actually mean it. Like I responded back to Gurley's tweet today because he was just like, I'm not going to give advice for people. Like if somebody says something wrong on the internet, why am I wasting my time trying to like, I'm like, yeah, why are you wasting your time? My response was mute the world and then build your own. So I don't really have like a judgmental attitude. I just think of like, do I want this in my life? Does this make sense? But like, I mean, George Lucas broke into, his school's, the film school so he could use the editing equipment. Like, I don't know. Is that unethical? It was like, what is he doing? He's trying to work more. John Carmack went to jail. He's the only one that went to juvenile delinquent for like, using an Apple II computer. Edwin Land broke into, I think, Columbia or NYU so he could run science experiments. Like, I don't think that's what you mean. You mean like, I'd have to get like a better example of that. I can't think of many. I mean, JC's autobiography. He's selling fucking crack. Like, yeah, do I think like, no, you shouldn't sell crack, but it'd be worse that he like, I also don't know what it's like to fucking grow up in, Marcy projects. Your dad disappears. Like you're in one of the worst possible situations you could possibly be in as a young man. No education. I think Jay-Z, obviously he's really smart. He's like a 7th grade education. No dad. His dad literally like raised him until he's like 10 or 11, then left. No money. You're single mom, 4 kids. Like I'm not excusing that, but like if I was in that situation, I don't know. And that's my way out. Like, am I going to sit here holier than thou? It's like, I would never do it. Like, I don't know. And I think that's the biggest thing is like, why I don't try to go on the internet that much. It's like, I'm not interested in like getting mad at if you study so much history, and I've been studying history for decades, there should be nothing that happens in the world that's surprising to you. There should be nothing that a human does that's like, oh, I've never seen that before. That never happens. It's just the same story that repeats over and over and over again because history doesn't repeat, human nature does. And I think studying history for a living is so beneficial because it allows you to step back. I don't think of something that's happening now. I'm like, oh, that is like this thing that happened in the 1700s. And that is like this thing that happened. It's like, oh, it just makes it easier to like deal with humans and, the vicissitudes of life. But yeah, it doesn't. I mean, there's a famous saying in the 1800s, like behind every great fortune lies a crime or something. Yeah, I don't know. You'd have to go back and replay that. Daniel Ludwig, The Invisible Billionaire, one of my favorite books. Really hard to find. Highly likely that before he built this massive shipping empire and this massive conglomerate, like he was a bootlegger. He was running. Actually, maybe he wasn't the bootlegger. He was running the alcohol, the illegal alcohol for the bootleggers. Yeah. Well, I don't know. It's the bootleggers a transport or the actual person selling it? Because he wasn't selling it. It was a hired hand.
Well, I thought it was transport. I don't know.
Okay, so then he was the bootlegger.
I like it.
Yeah. So what examples that you had in mind though?
I had one is Mark Cuban. Mark Cuban's like the perfect example of like he like his origin story is like when he was a kid doing all this kind of like sketchy stuff to make money.
What?
And then
the only thing I know is he ran like a bar when he was underage or something, right?
There's that, but even the like idea
David,
that
what's your line about the juvenile delinquent story of the juvenile delinquent? Like,
so that's Yvon Chouinard. It's like, if you want to understand the entrepreneur, you need to study the juvenile delinquent. The juvenile delinquent is saying with his actions, this sucks, I'm going to do my own thing. I don't think that's what I think Mitchell is saying. Like, there's a darker line maybe, because all the examples I gave you, like, no one's going to be upset this guy broke into fucking a college to run science experiments. Like, who cares?
I read the Ken Langone book pretty recently when he was on Patrick's podcast. I
loved that episode.
I did
88
too.
Years old and still like, that was fantastic.
He told this story in the book about how he worked for this business and basically like didn't do the job at all. Like he was supposed to be doing background checks on people, and he was like, yeah, I decided the business like shouldn't be doing background checks on people, and so I didn't do background checks. I just wrote nice things about everybody, and then they found out that I wasn't doing my job, and then they fired me. And you're just like, well, I guess that it's true, that's what he did. But I'm like, why would you even I guess Ken Langone's a real one. But at the end of the like story, he's just kind of like yeah, and I mean, I never felt bad about it because fuck them. It's like the end of it, and you're just like,
that sounds like he's making like a moral judgment. Like, I mean, I wouldn't want to be his
don't
boss.
Take the money.
Yeah, granted,
quit the job.
I wouldn't want to be his boss, but like, this is something that you've brought up a few times, so I know it. Like,
I just don't. It just confuses me why you would like
confession to make, Mitchell.
I know.
Yeah, I sold crack, but no, no, I don't know. It just is confusing that like people just tell.
Well,
that you can write any story
I appreciate that people are honest about their stories in retrospect.
Yeah.
Like when they have enough space and they feel safe.
Mitchell, you need to explain to us like what you mean. Like you said, it's frustrating that people can write their own stories. What do you mean?
No, it's not frustrating. It's just like you could say anything, and like why would you say that? Or even
did you read The Lessons of History by Will and Ariel Durant?
No.
Okay, but you know the background, right? They spent 50 years cataloging the entire human species. They wrote this 11-page,
the 10 zillion page book.
Yes,
11.
I think it's 11 separate things. Everyone's like 1,000 pages. It's the history of civilization. Then they write this book called Lessons of History. They're trying to summarize the human species and everything they learned from a half a century of being historians on the human race into a 100-page book. And there's a line in that book: in every age, governments have been corrupt and men have been dishonest. This is what I mean. Like, your response to that's fascinating. You're like, oh my God, can you believe people write down things that are not true? And I'm like, well, yeah, because I read The Lessons of History, and Will and Ariel said in every age, governments are corrupt and humans are dishonest. It's just like, that happens now. It'll happen 1,000 years after we're dead, and it's happened 10,000 years ago. It's like, I don't get upset about these things because the human species is obvious. Like, we're fatally flawed. Like, we are such a weird species. Like, I'm reading this book on the history. It's a biography of the Comanche Indians, and I'm obsessed with the history of the American West and Native American culture in general. And I'm listening to it last night before I go to bed, soothing history before I go to sleep. And they're like, yeah, the Comanches would catch another tribe and they would take the women from the other tribe and they would cut their Achilles tendon and they leave them in like the middle of the plains. Like, now you got to walk. You can't walk. You got an Achilles tendon. Like, what are you doing? Like, why would you do that to somebody? But it's not surprising. It's like humans have done fucked up shit to other humans forever. There's nothing in that book. Now there's some grotesque stuff, but it's like, yeah, that's what humans do. You got the lesson I take from that is like, I want to make sure I maneuver myself and my family into a position where I don't have to rely on the good graces of other humans. That's the biggest lesson from history. It's like, you should control the people that you have around you and the environment you're in as much as you can. And I think entrepreneurship just has to be the world's greatest creation to be able to do that, to literally what I said, mute the world and then build your own. But this idea where like, let's go protest or can you believe this human did this? Do you not understand? Like the same shit you're upset about today, they've been upset for 1,000 years. If that behavior routinely reappears to human history, what the fuck should that tell you? You're spitting into the tornado. You're not changing anything.
I think it's interesting. I think that is both deeply true, and it is also true that things have gotten markedly safer and less violent and more peaceful, and we've gotten smarter over time. And so, like, while I think what you are saying is mostly true, there's like a thin candy shell on the outside of like, someone's probably not going to cut your Achilles tendon and leave you in the plains to like crawl until you're eaten. Like, dude, and there's a bunch of reasons.
Do you see what's going on in Haiti right now? Yeah, they'll capture you and then they'll fucking barbecue you and eat you. What do you like? It just depends on where you are in the world. This is what I meant about building your own world and controlling your environment. Yeah. But like, that's actually maybe not true, because I don't buy into Pinker's theory, like the good angels of your nature, that humans are getting less violent. It's like, yeah, we just have our violence stored kinetically. Because I'm reading what's her name? Annie Jacobson. She's on this podcast. She did this historical novel, The Nuclear War. And so the book is like, it's minute by minute. I think it lasts like 90 minutes or something like that. I think split into 3. I'm listening to that too. And it just like goes into detail. It's like we have developed technology to a sufficient degree where we can exterminate every living species on the earth many times over. And I'm like, obviously we're just holding on. Like, hopefully we don't do this. But no, like that instinct, that human nature that caused them to do that, cut these tendons, is no different than, somebody and I'm not getting caught up in current affairs, but like invading another country or dropping a bomb on them or shooting up whatever. Like, it's just and again, it's probably, my guess would be a small percentage of the population that does these things, but it doesn't matter. It's like 10% of 8 billion people is a lot of psychopaths.
You think 10% of people are psychopaths?
5%, whatever the number is.
It's like, no,
we're getting into big ass numbers here.
They're big numbers. They're big numbers, but it matters. Like, it matters the difference between a totally ungoverned, like human nature ungoverned, and human nature in the context of a civilization and a whole set of like coordinating, cooperating technologies and norms that let us protect each other and serve each other and accomplish things together instead of compete over scarce resources and scraps of food. And we need to do everything that we can to appreciate, honor, and protect those things that keep us from having to shank each other for an apple. Like, we can honor the deep, deep roots and the like terrifying currents of human nature, and at the same time know that we have to fight that with the tools that we have, because we do not want to go back to that. So I agree. I wish things was like that, and I wish the world was, we all got along. My point is, like, I guess that where we might differ on opinions, and it really is like irrelevant, because I don't think we have control over this. This is like, human nature is not evolving. It's not changing. It is constant. No, I agree. I agree.
And so I would love for that to be the case. I would love, for there not.
I'm not
to
saying
be,
human nature is changing. I'm saying we have developed things that let us harness it effectively for good, and bad, but like more good than bad.
I think
We'll
I
see how
think
it plays
as
out. Hopefully, we're gonna have to see.
I mean, as we've said a few times, and I've said before, and you've mentioned, I've like said this before. I just think like you have to triage all this stuff coming into your everything that you read on Twitter, every podcast you listen to, every book you read is written by a person. And to your point, some people are great and some people aren't great, and you just have to like read through the middle. And to David, you say mute the world and build your own world, and it's like part of building your own world. You don't want to start from zero like a feral child in the middle of the woods. Like you have all these building blocks that you get to build your world out of, but you have to be so selective today about what you take in and what you just like tune out and who you bring in and who you cut out.
And what I mean by build the world is like the reason I kept doing this filmmaker series is because filmmakers literally build their own world.
Yeah.
It's like the analogy between the analogy between the analogy between entrepreneurship and movie making, I think it's very like deliberate and obvious. And so what I mean is like when the way I'm building my own world, right? It's like, you know, I'm one of the things I loved about Peter Thiel, he says like most people systematically undervalue their time, right? It's like literally the only non-renewable resource we have. And so like try to be very protective of my time. I still make mistakes. Like I'm still saying yes to way too many things, but I'm hopefully trending in a better direction. But what I mean is that it's like, I want to make sure like the work that I'm doing, like, because I'm putting a lot of my life energy into this, that is good for the world. I believe that what I'm doing is good for the world, right? And then when I'm not doing that, which hopefully is in service to other people, then I'm spending time with my friends and family, and I'm trying to take care of my health. Other than that, like I was just on my friend's boat for the weekend. We went to the Bahamas, and he's like, what? He's like, I recommend you listening to this podcast. And like, I'm not even going to tell you what the podcast was about or anything else, but I had like, hey, who's this guy they keep talking about? It's like, how do you not know who that guy is? Like, apparently he's like, there's this war going on in the world right now. And this guy was an influential person. And I was like, I don't know. Cause he's like, I don't read the news. Like what I told you is like, I literally just read old books, make podcasts, have great conversations with my family and great conversations with my friend. That is me muting the world and building my own. Now I'm not like, to the degree that I have control and influence over other people, then that is all guided into my work. Right. But I don't get upset. Some people, and you know, I used to be a political junkie when I was in like my early 20s, and you'd get so fucking like, there's this like emotional roller coaster. Like my team is doing bad, or this guy, it's like, I don't have any influence over this. Like, what am I doing? And then I started reading about, and then the advantage I had was I started reading about the early newspaper and media tycoons like Joseph Pulitzer and William Randolph Hearst. And people tell me you're stupid. I've heard this before. You're an idiot. You should read the news. And I go, I will read the news as much as you do once you read these two biographies, and not a minute before, because they literally built a blueprint that you're wrapped up in and you don't even understand that. And so that's what I mean. It's like, I never scroll Twitter and get upset. And there's fucked up shit on there. People doing bad stuff to each other all the time. It's just like, you should expect this. The point is like, I'm trying to build myself into a formidable individual, and I'm trying to protect myself and my family so I can resist all the craziness that is in human nature, that's inherent in human nature, the same problems we have today that we've been having forever. And so that's what I mean about mute the world and build your own. Like literally, like there's no point. The world has enough critics. We need enough enthusiasts. And I think what Eric referenced earlier is like criticizing something is wasting your time. The best way to criticize is not with your mouth. It's to build something different. And so that's what I'm trying to do. I'm like, hey, seems to be there's like a little terrible advice that you see in the modern entrepreneurship industry. There's these stacks of books about these people that seem to have some shit figured out. They wrote down all their ideas. Maybe somebody should just go back through and like, hey, this guy said this might work in your job. That's why it doesn't matter. Like to your point where like, you know, obviously humans lie. So how do we know stuff written in books is true? When I'm reading the story of, did this person really say this, or did this really happen? I'm not looking at like, I want the idea or the principle behind it. I abstract it away from the actual event and be like, here's the principle, right? And then is that principle useful in my life? And that is a very valuable use of your time, as opposed to, I don't know, did he say it in 1893 or did he not say it? Or like, this actually happened in 1896? That's irrelevant. It's the principles that I'm interested in.
Yeah, I love it. That is the optimizing for usefulness, I think, is actually the right thing. Like there's all kinds of things that are more useful than they are accurate. And as long as you feel okay selecting those, great. I love how well designed your life is for being able to shut out the world and build your own.
Yeah, and this is a problem. Like friends of mine that can't do that. It's like, well, they're capital allocators. I'm not a capital allocator. Like they have to know with like it affect like what's going on in the market. All this stuff affects their life. So it makes perfect sense. Again, I'm not here to like cast judgment on what other people do. We go back to this whole, some people want to be chairman of everything so they could be on the golf course. If you love golf and that's how you want to spend your life, good. That you should do that. My point of what I said about Walt Disney is don't look around, look in. If you are looking in, you're like, God damn it, I want to start this business and I want to hire a CEO because I want to golf or I want to do all this other stuff, then you should do that. There's nothing wrong with that. All I want, I just want to the degree that I want anything from anybody is just like figure out what's authentic to you and then do that. I don't think people have to be grinding 7 days a week or doing it. That's nonsense. It's like, do whatever you want to do. It's just for me, it's like, I don't want, I'm not seeking leisure. I get uncomfortable when I get too comfortable. That's a problem, but that's who I am. And so I've tried to relax. I feel uncomfortable. That's not what is comforting to me. The most comforting thing to do is what I'd be doing now if I wasn't doing this podcast is I'd be sitting in this room right now and I'd be reading a book for a few hours. And then I'd go to lunch with my wife and then I'd come back and I'd work on marketing for the podcast. And then I'd reread some past highlights and then I'd call up a friend. I already worked out first thing when I got to the morning. Then I'll pick up, I'll play with my son when he gets home from school. That is my life 7 days a week. That's what I want to do. As opposed to I'm not doing anything that's really leisurely. I'm not interested in that.
Well, I read
you and Elon Musk have that in common.
No, Elon's I'm nothing. You know what I mean? I do respect in the sense that that guy is not optimizing for easiness. He's not interested he's not even interested in happiness. He told you that. He's like, I'm not, people don't want to be me. But my point is people could criticize him. He's too extreme. He's like, but it's him. If that's what's in his life and that's what is actually inside of him, then who are we to judge how he should spend his time or what he should do?
Well, David, you have the conference business, which is you were very, very involved with in the first couple and the first few, but you have this kind of great outsourced team through the Capital Camp team helping you out. And then your other business, Founders Notes. I have that tweet I read a long time ago, the perfect business, 95% margins, 95% recurring revenue, no employees, no customers, no assets, negative working capital, no inventory, no CAC, no competition. And it's that Founders Notes is a very David business.
But it's not even the key there is and me and Patrick were on the phone about this yesterday, because this is also where I was going back to the Intel book. Cause I really do think I need to spend, and they've been really successful so far and I want to continue to do this, but educating the market that learning from history is a form of leverage. And what I'm now doing is, first of all, this is a tool for me. And so it's authentic to me because I fucking talked about it for years. I didn't think other people would be reading my stuff. But now what I'm realizing is just well, I'm really trying to build out an entire I'm trying to do the work for you. The interesting part about what the Perplexity guy said, the founder of Perplexity was on Patrick's podcast. And what he's trying to figure out, he's in some ways, and listen, ChatGPT, Perplexity, all of these have been amazing tools, right? It is what search should have been. When you start using them and you go back to Google, you're why don't you just do the work for me, dude? I don't want a list of 10 or 20 links. I want a summary of what's going on, right? And I can't pronounce his name, so I'm not even going to try. But the founder of Perplexity said something interesting. He's but that empty dialogue box that all the Perplexity has, ChatGPT, all of them have, is actually a bug that needs to be fixed. And he's he uses the example. He's if Steve Jobs was building AI, he wouldn't just leave it up to the user to derive value out of this product, right? Now, I'm building something hyper-focused for entrepreneurs. Turns out entrepreneurs ask the same questions over and over and over again. The questions that you need, all three of us need in our business: how to market, how to distribute, how to recruit, how to hire. Is there interesting distribution distribution ideas from the history of entrepreneurs? Give me some ways Alexander Graham Bell marketed this brand new invention, telephone, whatever the case is. Now, in the past, you had to do that work. So when Edwin Land was inventing the Polaroid camera, and when Steve Jobs was inventing the Macintosh, they both did the same thing. They went back and was like, well, how did Alexander Graham Bell market the telephone? So what the next step is, what the Perplexity guy said, he was just like, well, Steve Jobs would do the work for you. And once AI, this is the very beginning, but once AI gets really, really good, it'll know you so well that you won't have to ask. It knows what you need. And he compared it, what he's trying to deliver on, and Perplexity isn't there yet, is the Google. Remember when we first started using Google back in the day? They still have it, but I'm feeling lucky. And he's like, that's what it is. He's like, there is no input from the user. It's press a button and the AI tells you what you need. So what I'm doing next is I've been saving all of my searches and everything I've been using on Sage, and I'm building out. And then I'm also collecting from the other users. And it's like, I'm building a library. So maybe you go to the Sage, you have nothing, you don't fucking know what to ask today. There's nothing to ask. And that's why I asked if you use Perplexity, because it's very fascinating. It's like you can, if you look at the app and it has like the Discover feature and the library feature, like I want to build the Discover feature, right? That Perplexity has. But it's based on what is the collective community of founders using this tool. What are they asking? And for you to be able to search through and get ideas, it's essentially doing the work for you. It's like, here's the top 50 things. Here's the top 20 things. I don't know what the number's going to be, but like, if you read these 20 things, it's much more of like not an empty box. And then when you have a question, then the empty box is there. But it's like, the point is like, I have all the reason I think like this happens when we're on phone calls all the time. You guys will tell me something going on in your business or something going on in your life. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of like da-da-da. And it's just kind of like random, the shit I read. My point is like, I can use these tools better than anybody else because I made them for my fucking self before they were to sale for anybody else. Right. But how do I give the skill that I'm able to get out of these tools because of my life's work, what I do during the day, and give it to every single person that uses it? And so that's also, it's like, well, you know, it might be more profitable to just, you know, take 30% of this company and like you be a distribution point for it and let them do it. But I think it's such an important idea, and I'll see if I can deliver on it. That yeah, there is nobody else could do this but me. And so if I don't do it, it's not going to get made. And that's where it starts to get real fucking interesting, because the emails I get are really like, fuck, man, I didn't like it. Literally help them make an important decision in their work, just like the podcast has been doing, except it's on demand in a way the podcast can never be. And I'll see where this goes. But I know I'm not going to build after this. I'm not building any other product other than the podcast. And I can only dedicate time to this because it's embedded in my workflow and I'm literally using it every day because I'm fucking, like what we just said, there was multiple times in this conversation where it just came from my brain. Oh yeah, that's like fucking Edwin Land breaking into, you know, NYU, or that's like, you asked the what's that juvenile delinquent quote? You saw my eyes. I didn't fucking go look it up. It's like, that shit's in my brain. It's also in Founders Notes, but like that, how can I do that? Which is very valuable to me, but very like, how do I give you guys that power? And that's going to, you know, take a while to actually figure out, deliver on. But, yeah, it's very fascinating. And then the other aspect, the only thing that I think I'm uniquely fit to do is like connecting people in this audience. And so I feel good about that. Because, you know, I've already seen the emails and the texts and the phone calls about like, you know, our friends, like Justin Mares, who I'm not going to tell, I won't like violate the private conversation we had, but he met somebody. He's like, the price of admission just to meet that one fucking person is worth it. And he didn't know that person was going, you know what I mean? It happened very organically. And then now after that, that's the biggest thing. It's like after they left there, they're still talking. And if they are, and they're actually, but you're not 150 fucking people, you're not going to build relationships with 40. But even if you get 1 or 2 or 3, that's a phenomenal return on investment. Phenomenal. And what they're potentially working out is literally, it would be like a nonlinear return. Let's just fucking put it that way. So yeah, I think my point being is like, when I asked you, Mitchell, earlier, like, how do you want to spend your time? Like, I'm very comfortable with the way I'm spending my time. It's something it took me 32 years to find my path in life, another 5.5 to actually figure out if it's going to be a business and self-sustaining. And that's like, to some degree, I feel like I have a weight off my shoulders, even though I have a fucking tremendous amount of pressure. Like I still have problems sleeping and like all kinds of dumb shit sometimes because I'm in my own fucking head. But it's what Patrick said. Patrick, you know, knows everybody. And Patrick's like, dude, there's nobody else on the planet that I know that is more sure of what they want to do when they wake up than you. Like there's nothing else. It's not like, oh, I want to do something like, No, the only other thing is an extension of this. Like when we had that incredible conversation with Daniel Ek, we get in the car and Patrick's like, you need to, this is why I fucking keep telling you that you need to interview entrepreneurs, because you get to the soul of the founder in a way that nobody else possibly can. He goes, that was incredible. Now we can't record it. Daniel Ek's a fucking public company CEO and all this other stuff, but he's just like, that you have some fucking weird superpower that you're not using. You have to fix this loop because you get to the soul founder like anybody else. So that's the only other extension, but that's just what we're doing. When I call up Mitchell and we go for a fucking walk, or he comes to Miami, or I talk to you on the phone when I'm walking at night, like same fucking thing. It's just like, let's record some of these because the stuff we're talking about, it's like, it's not unique to us three. What you realize is like, dude, there's a million Davids on the fucking earth right now. There's a million, all of us on the earth. There's 200, 300 million entrepreneurial personality types on the earth. We're so much more alike to each other than we are to the general population.
And I mean, you do you are perpetually prepared. So like the idea that you can only read so many 800-page books every week, one or less, and it's a grind, but you can show up to a conversation with a guy like Daniel Ek and have a very interesting conversation has the bedrock of knowledge of every book you've ever read, everything you ever know, and then the other bedrock of knowledge of like you're one of the top 1% experts in the world in podcasting, and then you start to like those are two, you have this foundational wild skill that no one else in the world has, and then add anything else on top of that and go talk to somebody, and it's going to be interesting, right?
But
you're going to learn a lot.
I appreciate that you said that, but I think it's really important. It's like the way I live my life, I promise you, would be disgusting to some people, where it's like hyper focused on one thing, do it forever. I know a ton of people that would, and in many cases, they live lives which are maybe even more like fascinating, in the sense that like they don't want to focus on one thing. They're very curious. They want to have 10 businesses. That's what I mean. It's like, it's got to be authentic to you. I don't want to run 10 businesses. I literally want to be, because the reason I keep going back to Disney, I was just going to republish. This is the second time I read the Disneyland book. I was just going to republish an old episode after I did the 800-page biography of his. But I'm like, I feel like a kindred spirit with this guy. Disney is smarter than me, more accomplished than I'll ever be, better talent. He's literally a 1 in a 10 million talent. I don't think that's me, right? He's had a massive impact, built the best media company in history, period. But the way, like the way I felt a kindred spirit is like he felt compelled to whatever he was doing he didn't want to do something if he didn't feel he could be the best at it. And there's a story in that Bill Gates biography I mentioned earlier where like, I think at the time he thought either, I think a mathematician or a physicist. I can't remember which one. And he gets to Harvard and he's like, okay, I'm not better than that. I cannot be better than that guy at math or physics. So he's got to pick a different field.
Even Balmer. He's like, I'm nothing to Balmer in math. And so the point being is like, if that is your goal, Disney can't multitask. When Disney was working on Snow White, he was working on Snow White. When he's working on Disneyland, he's working on Disneyland. And so if that's not your personality type, if that doesn't drive you, it drove him. I feel kindred spirit to him. It drives me. But there's tons of people like that aren't like Sam Zell he just wanted to do shit that was interesting to him. And he wound up being, one of the best entrepreneurs ever. So there's multiple ways. How many fucking businesses does that guy have? Like 1 million. So there's not one right way. There's probably one right way for you, or a one way that's righter than other ways for you. And that's the biggest thing. Like that's one of the benefits of my job. It's like I'm watching game tape all day on how these guys live their lives. That's why I'm not reading business books. I'm reading biographies. It's a study of their life. Work just happens to be a massive part of that. And then you're like, oh, dude, life can be whatever you want it to be. I was having this conversation with my daughter. And what really made me, and I'm not like I'm not saying I don't care about school because that's not the right way, but like I was a terrible student. I skipped school. Like I went to a shitty college. Like it's like, I'm just like, I was a juvenile delinquent kind of character, right? She's very different. She's like a lot better than me. But what I didn't like is she was underperforming her potential so much. And my thing is like, the reason I'm pushing myself is like, I don't want to get to the end of my life with like untapped potential. I want to wring fucking life dry. Right. And so I made a deal with her because she was obsessed with Taylor Swift. I was like, listen,
you, to get the presidential's honor, the highest honor roll in her class or her school, she had to get 95 or above in other classes. My daughter's wicked smart. And I'm like, dude, this isn't an intelligence issue. This is an effort issue. So I'll make you a deal. You want tickets to Taylor Swift that would cost more than my first car did. I don't believe in spoiling you. But if you show an effort for an entire quarter and you hit that list, and I show you it's an effort thing, not a intelligence thing, I will get you tickets to Taylor Swift. And she hit it. And I was like, I told you. And so what I was trying to explain to her is like, the world is malleable. Like, you're going to get whatever you want out of life. Really, we've been talking a lot about the quality of her decisions, because in some cases she's been making, she made a low quality decision and she's dealing with the ramifications now. It's more in the social realm than it is in the academic realm. And I was like, that's a good, you're learning. I go, listen, you're upset now. You're learning the most valuable lesson you could ever learn, that the quality of your life is in direct relation to the quality of your decision making. And bad decisions have real fucking consequences. You know, my cousin Jennifer made a bad decision. She decided that she tried heroin, then she gets addicted to heroin, then she has a son, and she left her son an orphan. Or I guess he went with his dad. They were divorced, whatever. But she died at 27 years old from drugs. Like, this is a bad decision. Your decisions have consequences, both good and bad. And, you know, I think that's the biggest thing. It's like, man, the world and life, when you read biographies, you realize, oh, your life is exactly what you make it. And it's based on the decisions that you're actually making. And it's going to play out. It's going to play out over, hopefully, if you survive long enough, multiple decades. In Disney's case, he starts being an entrepreneur at 18. He's an entrepreneur until he's 66 or 65 when he dies. And you see, good decision, bad decision at the very beginning, lost control of his company. Good decision, pick a field he could be the best at. Good, like, you know, good and bad decisions. His career is not like up and to the right. It's fucking valleys and peaks up until the last 10 years, when he was kind of up until the right the last 10 years. So I think that's important.
Love it. Should we call that a podcast? And everybody should go do something that's authentic to them. David can get back to reading. Mitchell can go start an RIA.
You can
go back to writing.
CEO on Scribe.
And
you
can
writing.
Go back to helping people manifest the books that they love.
Have you made any announcement on when your next book is coming?
No, I am. There's no deadline on excellence, as I like to say. So I'm chipping away. I'm refining. I'm working on putting the final pieces together. But it's getting there. I'm excited about it.
I think it's, you have a high bar to pass, but it's going to be incredible.
I think for all the like awareness we have of Elon, he's still understudied as an entrepreneur, and like the lessons that he pioneered and how he's inspiring the whole next generation of like much more ambitious entrepreneurs. And the playbook that he's going to show them, I think, is going to produce some crazy stuff. I'm very excited about it.
Very cool. All right, so we're doing this once a quarter, twice a year. What are we doing?
I like quarterly. I like quarterly if we can do it.